Meeting to order. If everyone can please rise for a moment of reflection and the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes, here.
Mrs. Hoover?
Here.
Ms. Royce?
Here.
Mrs. Bowling?
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Here.
Mr. Gerton?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
Here. Thank you. We have all members present this evening. Moving on to amendment of the agenda. We have several here. We'll do the easy ones first. The Finance Committee report and the DEI Advisory Committee report, we will remove those from the agenda. Under second readings of ordinances and resolutions, we will be adding the Sherman Avenue Apartments. We had the first reading at the previous meeting, and it was missed on the agenda, so we are simply putting that back on. Under introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions, we will be adding item M7, which is regarding the Elm Avenue project. And Mr. Moore, I will make the comment about the third reading of the original Factory 52 resolution, but I will defer to you for additional comment on that one.
All right. I'm asking that council amend the agenda to add the second reading, under the third readings of ordinances, a resolution organizing the Factory 52 Community Authority. That is still on your agenda for a third reading. What you got in your packet and what is also on here for a first reading later on in the agenda is a resolution organizing the Factory 52 Community Authority with a number of changes, textual changes that were requested by the mayor. And I included both his request and then a red line showing the differences, and it was mainly about the way, the method, and the people that could be appointed to the board at this meeting and then in the future as well. And so we want to make the meeting as confusing as we possibly can, so I just want to add that as well.
Mrs. Hoover.
I make a motion, we amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to amend the agenda as stated. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to special presentations. We have Jennifer Vatter of JMA Engineering and Ed Williams with Tech Engineering regarding plans for the Montgomery Road Pedestrian Safety Improvement Project.
Good evening. There's a presentation in there. PowerPoint.
Here, Susan. Which presentation?
It's the PowerPoint, the presentation underscore Montgomery
This one?
Road. Yep.
Here we go.
I think you just. Oh, that's right.
And does this change the slides?
It should.
Okay, all right. We'll figure it out. So thank you very, very much for having us this evening. I wanted to give an update on the Montgomery Road Ped Safety Project.
If it does not, tell me when to
Okay.
move next, and I
Okay,
got
go
it.
ahead, next. So the project extends essentially from Monroe Avenue up to the bridge. It says Maple there, but it's essentially up to the bridge. Basically, the presentation I have laid out, and we'll go through each block to kind of look at the changes that we will have. There's several pieces to this project, and we'll talk about all of them, but, through this process, we worked with Duke, two different divisions of Duke, and then we also worked with SORTA to come up with some updated bus shelters and bus stop locations. So next slide. And I'm going to go through these kind of quick, but the idea is to show you what was there, the next slide, and then kind of show you what it will look like after the construction is complete. And if you look, the curbs are coming out. So essentially, there is a large area in the middle of the road that we're pulling the curbs out. The road is not shrinking at all. It's the same number of lanes, but the sidewalks are getting a lot larger. We have a lot of amenities such as lighting, which we worked with Duke on, and then trees, which we worked with the tree board on. The red highlighted area there is a bus stop, which we'll talk about later, but we worked with SORTA on that bus stop with shelters and some other amenities that the bus stop will have. So you can go to the next slide. Again, this is kind of a little cleaner version, just to kind of give you an idea. In most of these areas, the sidewalk's coming out significantly. Most of the sidewalk is about, I'd say 7, 8, 9 feet, somewhere in there, and it's going up to around 18, 20 feet. It's a pretty significant improvement. The other thing I'll point out is that the bus stop location, you'll see that's concrete in the road to help prevent some of the shoving from the buses. Next slide. So then this is the next block. Next slide. You can see parking areas with trees, again, lighting. All the tree wells will have receptacles for, lights, those kind of things. And then again, a bus shelter in design on the south side of the road. Next slide. And again, it's just kind of an easier way to see it overlaid on the aerial. Next slide. And next slide to kind of show the difference. These couple blocks here will have underground electric to bury the utilities and get rid of the poles out on Montgomery Road. I will point out in the parking areas, obviously, the sidewalk is only slightly bigger than it is today because of the parking. But in the other areas, the sidewalk is pulled out significantly. Next slide. And that kind of shows it a little bit different, a little bit easier to see at Sherman. We did pull it out around the corner at Sherman specifically. We did run that through with truck turning templates to try to shorten up the crossings at all of these to make it safer for pedestrians to cross the street. I will point out at a lot of the signals, especially Sherman, the poles will be painted, so they'll be, black. The signal heads will be upgraded and realigned to align with the lanes. There will be updated vehicle detection as well, so that the cars are detected. Next slide. And then next slide. So this is the Elm section. Again, showing you the tree locations and the parking locations. Next slide. And then the last section, next slide, is this is basically extending from up in front of the potential development there with with the old Quality Inn, and if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the changes with that and the proposed future extension of Crown Avenue is proposed with that development there. And the next slide. And finally, if you go to the next slide, so this is kind of the Sorta Metro bus stop. This is an example of one that we talked about with them. This is in Indianapolis. And a couple things I'll point out there is it has near level boarding, so it is a raised curb. It does have a ramp up to that area so that the bus doesn't have to kneel down as much. It's not fully raised, but the buses don't have to kneel down as much. But what that does is it increases the load, it decreases the loading time so that they can load quicker and move down the road and keep on time. The Sorta will be installing the shelters. That will be part of the project, but through Sorta. And then the potential for totems, it's like a sign, a lighted sign that will notify of the buses and stuff. And it's to highlight Norwood itself and the bus shelters. So then the last slide is kind of an estimated project cost and kind of funding summary. So estimated cost right now is around 4.3. There's a grant that you have received at about 2.3 million. There is some upfront costs with Duke related to the underground electric, and that's kind of the funding summary and cost. And if there's any questions, I can answer those. I know I went through that pretty quick. But.
Mrs. Hoover.
Yes.
I have sorry, for the chair. I have a question regarding the lights. My recollection with street calming is the lights, they'd like them brought down. Is that accurate?
So the lights the lights will be taller so that there's less lights, so that they can broadcast a wider band of light and provide more uniform coverage. The shorter lights tend to not light up as much. These will be a taller, like a 30-foot light pole. They can be spaced out and provide more uniform lighting.
Okay.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes. First, thank you so much for doing this presentation. I've been seeing this through all of its iterations, and it's nice to see it so close, tantalizingly close to being done.
Yes, yeah.
I was also very happy to hear that there will be concrete at the bus stops.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. In previous iterations, that had not been the case, so I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
The one question I had was possibly something that could be changed later. There's a push in some kind of higher pedestrian traffic areas to have like a leading interval, so when pedestrians have a 2 or 3 second kind of all red walk sign, so they get out into the street so they're more visible to cars. Is that something that could potentially be integrated into this?
Yeah, so I think you guys have newer controllers. I think once we get the detection set up and the shorter curb distance, I think that's something that's very easily implemented along the corridor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for
Thank you.
having us tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to requests to address council. So we have a number of those. There are several that are linked to agenda items. There are others that are not. So we will do the ones that are not pertaining to an agenda item first. First request is Marilyn Hanrahan.
Hello. Thank you for letting me speak again. I'm here regarding the scheduled public hearings concerning PLK on December 23rd. I believe there's 4 or 5 of them already scheduled. This timing seems highly problematic, as many residents will be busy with holiday plans and some may even be out of town, including possibly members of this council. It seems both unfair and impractical to hold such important hearings at this time. Given the significance of these decisions, it's crucial that the citizens of Norwood, particularly those in the new development area, have the opportunity to attend and voice their opinions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of any laws or ordinances that state this be done in any timeline except for the 30-day notice. I believe you can retract the original notice and advertise another 30-day notice, and these hearings could actually be held in February. This would give time for a town hall meeting that the people of Ward 3 will be asking for later tonight, to discuss and have a true back and forth with the city's administration on these issues. I respectfully request that the hearings be rescheduled to a future date, allowing for proper participation and discussion, taking into account the need for community involvement, your constituents, in these important matters. Thank you for your attention in this. Thank you for your attention in this issue.
Thank you. The next request to address council is Tram Win.
First of all, thank you for allowing me to address the council tonight. I'm Tram Win from the Buddhist temple. Our temple is located at the corner of Robertson Avenue and Beach. We have been operating there for over 24 years. So with the upcoming PLK Phase 3 development, we do have the same concerns as our neighbors about potential problems with traffic, safety, noise, environment, psychological impact, and street flooding. All that will negatively impact our temple operations. However, tonight, I would like to raise some unique cultural concerns from our Buddhist community. The renditions that PLK presented to the planning committees in previous meetings showed that the only vehicular entrance to our temple will be blocked off or severely restricted due to the construction of a landscaping island on the temple side of the shared driveway, the only exit and entrance driveway. We don't know, but for sure, but the landscaping island may not be in compliance with the property line setback requirements in the city council, city ordinance. The restricted driveway entrance will cause us serious safety concerns for our members in case of emergencies, fires, and access for facility services. Basically, a fire truck, ambulance service, someone come service, air conditioner, they just can't get to close to the temple through that entrance. And then, in addition to that, it would create hazardous conditions for people who have disability or elderly people who have problems walking long distance inside our temple, and we have quite a few elderly members. So it is hard enough to really maintain the operation, attract the members to go sacrifice at that times, to go to temple. This could make it even harder, and basically this could force the shutdown of the temple. And if this is the case, the cultural links being cut off, the health and well-being of our members will be greatly negatively impacted. And the community will lose a unique cultural pillar in the neighborhood. We have been a good neighbors, and we believe our neighbors are very supportive of our operation there over the years. Our temple is a place for Buddhists to worship and practice our religions. It is the place of Vietnamese American, Chinese American, and other members to meet their compatriots. It is the place for the minority groups to gather to exchange information and to learn from each others about language, laws, society norms, medical advice, job, and opportunities, to be able to adapt to and to be successful in this country. Believe me, it is a small community, but the need is great. We can be at the temple. We have people working in factory. They had excellent medical service, but they never show up in the hospital until it end up in emergency because of the language. They didn't know, they so afraid talking to the doctor and the nurse. They just suffered until they couldn't handle anymore. That is one of the example. So it is the place for the member to get emotional support. The young, the old get together, talk in their language, talk about the culture. It make them feel better, and that will alleviate loneliness, reduce depression, and isolation and hopelessness. We lean on each other to build confidence in the new country. Some of them not really new. They've been here for 23 years, for example. They just got problem with the culture. They don't know about the law. They don't because of the language situation. As a fact, some of them, a lot of them couldn't even communicate with their kids at home. The kids always speak English and don't even know what the parents talking about. So they come to the temple and ask for help. And also a place for the children and young adults to come celebrate their culture and languages. So as I mentioned, we have been at the same location for 24 years, and we've been allowed to use the same road access for our temple operation. We are good neighbors in the community, and we have played a part of making Norwood a diverse and better place to live. So my request is for the city council to take our concerns into your decision before your final approval of PLK's Phase 3 development. We are asking for your help and your intervention so we to be able for us to maintain the temple operations. Thank you.
Thank you. The next request to address council is Wayne Allen Stanton III.
Hello, how are you guys doing this evening? I'm coming to speak on Police Officer Williams, Peyton C. Williams Sr., badge number 225, and Sergeant Kenneth Devers, K9 Ramos, and I want to add Chief Sumner in on this one too. But these are the guys that violated my rights. And I've come up here, this is probably my third time I've addressed. Some of you weren't here, some of you were. And I've went other avenues. I've done a formal complaint with Chief, he found no findings, which I appealed it, and I sent it over here to Noah Powers. And that was on, I have from his secretary, September 30th. I had not heard one word back from him about my appeal on the chief's decisions. So when I spoke to his assistant, I think yesterday, I said if he wasn't gonna do anything with my appeal or even do any investigation on it. I told him to bring it back to me. But I want to state some ORCs that these officers and the chief violated. For one, the officer that initially pulled me over, Officer Williams, had marijuana in his car, and he didn't have it in evidence bag. And he called a canine to come sniff my car while having weed in his floorboard in a Ziploc baggie for no probable cause or reasonable articulable suspicion. All off a hunch. I was smoking a cigarette. He felt like I was lying to him. This is why this case got dismissed. All these charges were dismissed, and I'm trying to come to you for some accountability and some reform. And I would like maybe some recourse. I'm really out on this, and I feel like I come and talk to a few of you, not all y'all, and I just feel like I'm being treated like a dog, like my rights don't matter, just because they could do whatever they wanted to me. No, that's not right. And under Ohio Revised Code about an officer in possession of marijuana of a controlled substance, ORC 2925-03, possession of a controlled substance, that's against the law. And I don't understand, even if he did confiscate it earlier, I looked up all his records from the arrest prior to me. There's nothing. He had nothing showing that he had picked up this contraband he had in his car. But also, he also, under ORC 2921-03, was interference with civil rights in the operation of a public office. Because I told him, I asked him, I said, what is your probable cause? He would never state. He just said I was smoking a cigarette. And I had lost my job. I had to pay $3,500 for a lawyer to fight this and get all this dismissed because it's frivolous, just like the judge said. And I come up here trying to get some accountability and transparency, and I want some reform because it's not just about me. What if one of your constituents are out here and they do the same thing to them? Or your mother, your daughter, sister? This is serious. And I just feel like just because it's me, it's okay, but it's not okay. But also, I still want to elaborate. The chief of police is throwing away complaints, not even looking at them. And this is not exaggeration. I don't come up here just to make up stuff. This is real life stuff for me. So I want to say that he violated the ORC 2921-12, tampering with evidence, and ORC 2921-32, obstruction of justice. Also, ORC 2921-13, dereliction of duty, and last but not least, ORC 2921-03, violation of civil rights. That's like you're trying to shut me down. I don't have nobody backing me up. So you guys feel like you can just push me around and my voice isn't going to be heard. I'm going to be up here every meeting until I hear from somebody. Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you. The next request to address council is Bishop Sonny James.
Good evening, council, president of council. Let me first say it is always an honor to stand before peers. I want to address my brother. My heart aches when somebody comes around our peers and says, I feel like I'm not being heard. There's only one person that I know that has stood before this council for years and could honestly say, I know exactly what that feels like. So you're no longer standing alone. We're going to stand with you. But here's the thing. I believe Norwood is moving in such a positive direction that even some of the officers that my dear resident mentioned are good men. Listen, we all are subject to error. Nobody is without mistake. but nobody has a right to make somebody else feel less than important. And so, yes, Chief Sumner, we will be coming to just inquire to see how we can work together to make sure that every resident's heart and voices are heard. And to Chief's credit, I can't speak for him, but I truly believe God has placed some awesome leaders in our community. And I believe that our chief has a heart to hear you. We're just going to make sure that your heart is heard. Noah Powers has proven himself to me over and over again. So I have no desire to step into his office with an adversary challenge. He's always been open to listen. And I believe he will listen. But nobody should walk around feeling like their voice isn't heard. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we had council meeting regarding PLK. And I received several phone calls saying, Bishop, why didn't you stand with those ladies? And I said, whoa, calm down. I do stand with the residents. Well, you didn't say anything. So we'll get to that part later. Guys, we've come a long way as a community. We really, really have. If you just take a look at what's going on in the country, I'm encouraging every family that's watching, and I'm watching the clock. I like how the screen has been put closer to me. This youth crime and gun violence initiative that I've introduced to you months ago, it's real, and it's very, very much needed. If any resident is watching now, or you know of some young person that may have gotten off kilter a little bit, I am willing to work with the police department, but this is not a project or program for incarceration. We are committed to saving the lives of our young people. Some of them may be a little more aggressive than what we're accustomed to, but we have the anointing and the skill set to work with them. Many of you watching or listening right now, I encourage you to go look up Channel 9, Searching for Solutions. You will see this initiative. They are running this on an ongoing basis. I am going after, without any regrets or apologies, I'm going after $1 million donors. We've already landed our first. We're going after them to urge them to help us get deeper involved in the lives of our young people. If you just watch your TV, recently a gentleman who was a valedictorian of an Ivy League school, parents are business owners. He was far from being a thug, from what we label thugs. But he openly murdered another human being. I want crime and violence to be your number one priority. I don't want any of my police officers' life threatened. And how Norwood normally works. When you come up with a good idea, the old head of Norwood would shake their head and say, oh, good idea, Bishop. But then they would try to take it over and do it on their own. Well, you can't. We are specifically anointed and gifted to do this. And I'm asking and urging every resident, business owners, come and support us with this anti-gun and crime initiative. If you want proof of what we're doing, go to Channel 9, Searching for Solutions. Call me, 513-487-8843. I'm here to help our community. And let's take back the greatest city in all America. God bless you.
Thank you. Next request to address council. I cannot read the last name. Jim on Forest. If you can just state your name, please.
My name is Jim Favre. I'm at 4236 Forest Avenue. I am a relatively new resident here and just want to speak about the PLK situation. So If some of my things seem repetitive, I apologize because you probably have discussed these things already, but I had a few questions. So since this isn't a question and answer, I will just put these out as statements. So first of all, I understand there's going to be a 2% fee. Just wondered, could this possibly be split among the city of Norwood and PLK, where you could recover some of your costs? The other thing I had a concern and that the council should consider is, have they met all the green space requirements? That I don't know. I'm sure that was done with planning and zoning earlier. Also, water runoff requirements and the impact to the neighborhood. Usually that is something that affects, and having walked the property and see how it slopes out, that might be something to consider. Also notice that the PUD settled as a non-continuous plot, and it wasn't on the original Factory 52 PUD. I don't know if that was ever resolved, or if there was an overlay of the map where they got it to connect. Was just kind of another thing to be considered. Also, is the South Robertson plot residential only? Could it have the same PUD as Factory 52? Where you could do retail or something else? These are questions that popped up in my mind. Also, the temple that Mr. Tran had spoken about. What I noticed is the curb cut there. I don't see how you could get a fire truck down there, and that's a safety issue. And I don't know if they plan on cutting the curb wider, and how it almost runs into his property. So that would be something for the safety director to consider. Also, I think the temple is a regional asset. It's really quite unique and services, I heard Mr. Tran say, services a large area where they have folks as far as Westchester that come to this. And I think it's a real asset for the city of Norwood. Also, Beach Street has parking on both sides. So, if you do that and you have, a fire truck, ambulance or something, do you need to make that a one-way where you can have traffic come through? Then the increased traffic control, obviously you probably spoke about that quite a bit. So I just want to thank Mr. Chairman, staff, City Council, members at large for letting me speak. And as stewards of the city, I hope that you consider these recommendations and hope it works out well. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have 7 other requests to address council. One is pertaining to the, disposal of personal property. That's regarding the milling down of confiscated firearms. There are 6 others. It appeared like, 7 others. It looks like they're having to do with the 2% and the community authority. I just want to make sure, for those of you who have submitted a request, if you wanted to speak now, or what I was going to do with those is have them before the consideration of the 3rd reading. But if there was anyone, if I misread the notes and you wanted to speak now instead of prior to that, if you want to let me know. Otherwise, the rest I will save until we hit that item on the agenda, which is coming up. All right. All right. So Terry Meager?
Yep.
Got it.
That would be me.
Thank you.
A request for a town meeting. Just what Jim was doing, asking questions. We have so many questions. You might not have so many people up here speak in our mind if we would actually have a town meeting about PLK and our concerns with them. I wanted again to stress the importance of the increased traffic around Factory 52. On the 23rd agenda, there's a PUD, which is number 4, which is the final PUD for the plan of multicolor development. That has 2 caveats in the Planning Commission to consider, for you to consider from the Planning Commission. The tree board, which I understand, they have submitted something. And there is supposed to be no permits to be issued until unresolved and safety open issues have been addressed and approved by the building department and forwarded to City Council for public hearing and further consideration. That is all in a letter from the Planning Commission. I understand that the whole committee has discussed possibly making the streets no-through streets that feed traffic to and from 71 to Factory 52. This will hopefully change the navigational maps to route Factory 52 goers to the two-way streets that are better equipped to handle the increased traffic. I assume that the route would be down Smith, right on Forest, right on Kenilworth, or maybe even Robertson or Park. Right now, if you go down any of those side streets, Melrose, Beach, Ida, Marsh, there's parking on both sides of the street. One car can go, so you got to pull over to let somebody through. It's ridiculous. There has been no concern from PLK about this. In fact, even the sidewalks at Beach and Robertson, you can't even see the sidewalks anymore because they're faded. There's no crosswalk signs, there's just stop signs. Now, once upon a time, there was a four-way traffic stop there. That was changed sometime after the closure of 2009. Now we're getting back up to speed of that traffic again. Could there be consideration of a four-way stop there with traffic lights? Has anybody had a chance to review the traffic study that was submitted by PLK? A lot of discrepancies and inaccuracies. Playing cards, the study said there was 3,000 employees. Wikipedia indicated 750. Fox 19 report indicated 500 at the time of closure. Multicolor, study never provided an employee count, but did reference it estimated it using on the building of 327,000 square feet. Multicolor had an overflow parking lot, which was behind the Buddhist temple, and it was never full. I live there, I know. At the time of the closure, there was 59 employees. Preliminary discussions were held with City of City of Norwood staff with the traffic people. It was determined the traffic analysis would focus on 7 intersections. There was a suggestion of a roundabout at Park and Forest or a four-way stop. Those intersections were Norwood and Forest, Park and Forest, Park and Beach, Robertson and Beach, Kenilworth and Forest, and the 5 Point at Sharpsburg. I live at Beach and Leslie, so I feel I am a great observer of the traffic. I have not seen any intersection as busy as Beach and Robertson right now. It is only going to get worse with the multicolor during construction and when it's occupied upon completion. Finally, the turning movement counts were taken for the 7 intersections I just mentioned in early September 2020. Well, the pandemic was going on. The peak hours were 7:30 to 8:30 morning, 4:30, 5:30 afternoon. It is noted that the traffic counts were taken during COVID-19 pandemic when businesses and schools were operational. I would have to disagree with that. Many still work from home. My husband worked for Paycor. They never returned to their building. Still isn't. Also, in that time, people weren't going to the grocery store. They weren't going out. They were having their groceries delivered. People were freaking out. In 2020, there was 460,000 people that died of COVID, and it didn't get any better the next year. Another issue I would like to address is Phase 3, which is on the December 23rd meeting. Number 5, we'll place a PUD on the property south of Robertson. Of course, more traffic for this PUD is 152 additional apartments on a side street behind the Buddhist temple and behind the houses of Robertson, Beach, and Ida. You take that whole block, go in the back, that's where it's going. I suggest you guys take a field trip and go look at it. The street now is 22 feet wide, right there at Angelo's in the temple. They're wanting to be 24. How's that gonna happen? This is why we need the town meeting. We have questions. We deserve answers. This is affecting our lives. Our residential streets, especially over there where the Phase 3 is gonna be, is not set up for this. Over on the other side, I'm good with that. You know, that's industrial area. They have the streets wide enough. They're bringing income to our cities. I'm good with that, if they would handle the traffic. That's all I have for today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Was there anyone else who submitted a request to address council who wanted to speak now as opposed to prior to consideration of the resolution? All right.
Hello. My name is Diane Barrell. I'm a longtime resident of Robertson Avenue. I've lived here a long time, and I love this little community. I am not anti-development, but I would like to see development that benefits all of Norwood, and especially in the people in the area that's been talked about, Robertson, Ida, Beach. We're part of Norwood too. We are being told that some of the benefits of the new 2% tax is to continue the free events at Factory 52 and for the maintenance and upkeep of their facilities. This is what we also want as citizens of Norwood. We want maintenance and upkeep of our streets, not ones riddled with potholes. We want our concerns about safety and increased traffic and parking congestion addressed, and not to be anxious every time we pull in or out of our driveway about being in an accident. Incidentally, I almost hit a jogger tonight going out. We want our parks and our green spaces to be well-kept and to have beautiful mature trees in our backyards and not to have them cut down to make the landscaping matchy-matchy. While the fun-free events and the development of Factory 52 are great for those who live there, they are having some very detrimental effects on the immediate surrounding residents. Despite what you're being told with the traffic study, traffic has increased. As Terry just said, we live there, we know, we see it, we live with it every day. We also have an increased level of noise, an additional burden on our sewer system. Had a sewer, my sewer pipe's broken right now. I can't prove how it happened, but I have a pretty good idea. When there's heavy traffic, construction, and there are large pieces of concrete being picked up and dropped to the point where I can feel the vibration inside my house, maybe it didn't break my sewer pipe, but I'm sure it didn't help it. I'm afraid the implementation of the new community authority has the potential to create two Norwoods. One where the streets are paved and smooth, the facilities and the green spaces are well maintained, and then another Norwood, the one outside the perimeter of the NCA, where the streets will continue to deteriorate and the city picks up the tab for the additional use of resources. Yes, I would like to be able to walk to a free music concert at Factory 52, but for me personally, this does not upset the far more pressing things that need to be addressed in our wonderful little community. I understand the projected amount of money that would be derived from this tax would be approximately $20,000 a month, and that the city of Norwood receives $0. Unless there is some way for some portion of these funds to be used for the benefit to help improve the city of Norwood and not just Factory 52, I ask you at this time to please vote no on the 2% tax request and the NCA. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who wanted to speak now as opposed to later? All right. Then we will move on with the agenda to reports of standing committees of council. And the first is the Housing, Health, Environment, and Public Safety Committee from November 20th.
Apologies, that was also in the mailbox that's missing.
All right. Then Mrs. Hoover, would you like to make a motion to move this to the next meeting?
Yes, please. I make a motion to move this to the next meeting.
Is there a second? Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Motion by Mrs. Hoover is to move the Housing Committee report to the next council meeting. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to next item, that is the Committee of the Whole report from December 3rd, 2024. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Council of Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred Community Survey and Traffic on Beach Street, beg leave to submit the following report. Discussion about traffic on Beach between Robertson and Duck Creek. Residents continue to raise concerns about the increase in traffic on the side streets to get to Factory 52. considering wayfinding signs to place along Smith Road and/or no-through traffic signs posted on Marsh and Melrose. Mr. Skelly was in attendance and provided input regarding density within the development and the PUD. Questions were raised about concerns between the south of Robertson and north of Robertson PUDs. It was recommended to forward those concerns to the Law Department regarding the splitting of the ordinances into north and south of Robertson as opposed to everything in one ordinance. The community survey has been fully developed in SurveyMonkey. The survey is broken down into 6 sections, soliciting information from residents, those working in Norwood, and those visiting Norwood for a variety of options. All of the survey questions were reviewed with several edits, additions, and deletions made. Discussion took place about the confidence interval and number of completed surveys needed to help validate the data. The survey could be available as early as December 6th and may remain active until May or June timeframe. There are capabilities within SurveyMonkey to cross-tab the data based on various questions. Additional testing of the revised survey will take place prior to the final version being distributed for the collection of data. Results of the community survey will be utilized to work on council's master plan for the city. The new council orientation, master plan for the city, and standard operating procedures for council will remain in committee for further discussion and development. Respectfully submitted, Joe Gears, chairperson, Mrs. Franzen, Mrs. Hoover, Mrs. Bowling, Mrs. Winterbauer, and Mr. Gurdon. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we accept the committee report.
Motion to accept the committee report. Is there a second? Mr. Gurdon.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gurdon. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I'd like to share, it's really a phenomenal survey. I've taken it many, many times now. I hope all the other council members have had an opportunity to play with it, make sure that there aren't any additions or changes. But it's really, I find to be very professional, and I'm very, very impressed. So thank you for your diligent efforts with that.
Welcome. Thank you. And there will be a QR code. There is a QR code that is available, and we can start distributing that and posting that so that we can have as many of these surveys completed as possible. And we will also look into having printed out copies available here at City Hall for those who might not have access to the web-based survey. Mrs. Hoover.
Are you ready to start distributing it now?
We are ready. I deleted all of the test data.
Thank
So
you.
yes, it is ready.
Fantastic, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other discussion? All right, motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mr. Gurdon, is to accept the committee report. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurdon?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to, you had 2 DEI committee reports. I only had noted for 1. So for this next one, would you like to?
Additionally, also move it to
Make-
next month?
Yes, thank you.
Sir.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to move the other DEI report to the next council meeting. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurdon?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to third readings of ordinances and resolutions. The first is an ordinance amending the provisions and fee schedules under Chapter 1305.05 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I make a motion to suspend the rules, or actually, no, it's third reading. Make
Yes.
a motion to have the third reading.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to have the third reading of the ordinance. Mr. Gurdon.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Gurdon. Any discussion? I know yes, Mrs.
Yeah.
Winterbauer.
I didn't know if Mr. Wolf wanted to speak on this at all.
Mr. Wolf?
Thank you. You've received my letter giving you a little background of where we are on today's fee schedule. we haven't had our fees raised since 2007, which is about 17 years. And at that time, they raised them, from my knowledge, because I'm new to the position, they were still behind the eight ball trying to raise fees to get them up to some kind of monetary value. Well, today we're in the same situation. We're trying to get ourselves back up to where it's somewhere reasonable, because our department brings in dollars through the people that use it, through buildings, for any kind of building that goes on in Norwood. They come to us, they get building permits and pay the fees. And our fees are well below not every other one, but almost every municipality within the city limit, within probably about a 30-mile radius of Norwood. And right now, we should be in the gray areas. Maybe not in the black, which we would love to be, but if we were in the black, we would probably have to raise our fees 40% or more, okay? We are only asking to raise our fees right now, because I know 40% would be a non-starter, or even 60% would still definitely be a non-starter. We are asking for 7% this coming year, 5% the next year, and 2% each and every year thereafter for the next 3 years, which will only get us up to 19%, which at least is getting us moving in the right direction. We right now have a couple of big major projects coming up, and I would like to get those fees involved in helping us stay in the black. Otherwise, what's going to happen is if we go in the red, we're going to be taking money out of other coffers of the city. And that stops the city from spending money doing other things, because we still have to pay our employees. And we have 5 employees, and they all do the work. They go out in the field, we review the drawings, and the ones that should be paying for our fees should be the people using us, not our neighbors that haven't done any work in a while, and or anybody like Susan. If she's not doing any work, why should she be subsidizing our department? The ones that should be paying for our department, our people, are the people using it, contractors and builders. So we are asking to have it approved and move forward, because we need this money to keep us going.
All right, Mr. Wolf, for those who might be unaware, can you state your role within the city?
I am the city building official.
Thank you.
The chief building official, actually.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question to, I'm sorry, what's your name again, sir?
Ralph Wolf.
Mr. Wolf. A few years back, we went over the building schedule, and we decided to implement some raises then. And I'm just curious, why do you know, if you know, why they weren't implemented at the time?
I cannot answer that question. I do not know. I just know from my talking with Mark, our plant building official, not a building official, our inspector, who's been around for like 20-something years, he said we haven't raised our fees at all since 2007.
I appreciate it.
So what has happened between then and now, or the last couple of years, I cannot answer that question.
I appreciate it. I respect that. Thank you. I appreciate you being here tonight.
And I'm sorry I wasn't here all the other nights. The first time I was sick and just couldn't do it. And the last one, everything's so busy around this time, I just forgot about it. And
Well,
I'm
thank you
sorry.
for that as well. No need to apologize. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
I was wondering if Mr. Bonsall would like to answer that question. I believe he mentioned it last time. I don't know if you were here.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, we did have, when the 2 years that I was finance chair, we did have an extensive discussion with the building department about it. At the time, they were wanting a 30% increase, just a one-time increase. We weren't looking at pushing it out for any number of years. We had the discussion about it. We talked about it for a very long time. I mean, we opted at the time not to refer it to the full council, and it just wasn't brought up anymore. So I think I mentioned it the last time, it definitely is probably time for them to start raising the 7%. To me seems pretty reasonable, and, I mean, everything that Mr. Wolf said makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
One more question to
Mr. Braden.
the Law Department, please, through the chair.
All right.
If you don't mind, Mr. Moore. I'm sorry, are we in the third reading of this? Where are we at here?
Yes,
Can you help me out?
third.
This is reading number 3?
Third reading.
Given my position in the community and my employment, is this something that I should be voting on, or should I abstain from this type of vote? I think we know where I stand on this. Is this something I should abstain on? If you don't mind answering a real-time question, sorry to put you on the spot, sir.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. Since we're not voting on a contract that you would be directly benefiting from, and because we're talking about a rule that applies across the board to everyone that needs a building permit in the city, then this would not be a conflict of interest. It's a general rule that you're passing on.
Thank you. I appreciate your input. That's why I asked. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mr. Garten, is to have the third reading of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Garten?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the third reading of the ordinance.
Thank you very much.
Ordinance amending the provisions and fee schedules under Chapter 1305.05 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover?
I make a motion that we pass the resolution, ordinance, pardon me.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Franzen?
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Garten?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
No.
With a vote of 6 in favor, 1 against, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda. This is a resolution authorizing the Factory 52 Community Authority, establishing the boundaries of the authority, appointing members of the Board of Trustees of the authority, establishing the method for selecting the Board of Trustees of the authority, establishing the method for dissolution of the authority, and fixing the surety bond amount for members of the Board of Trustees. And we do have several requests. We still have 5 requests to address council on this item. First request to address council is Susan Knox.
Norwood has been my home for 27 years, and I tell my Cincinnati and Kentucky friends that Norwood is the most interesting and the safest city I've ever lived in. By safest, I mean, in part, you can't beat the fire and the police department's response times. I love the fact that politics is alive and well here, that people will speak their minds, that Kroger is just down the street, and the world's best auto mechanic is only a block away. I was certainly glad to learn that PLK was going to make the Factory 52 development into a lifestyle destination, with restaurants, shops, and even music. Norwood definitely needs more music. Perhaps, I thought, Factory 52 might be an option should I ever decide to downsize. Tonight, though, I am asking you, at a minimum, to really slow down the process on the resolution allowing Factory 52 to become a community authority. I understand the cost of developing both Phase 1 and 2 is estimated at $250 million, and that a significant portion of that is being financed through 2 30-year TIFs, 1 and I think 2 15-year TIFs, as well as grants. equaling tens of millions of taxpayer dollars. Yet, at a recent council meeting, a PLK attorney told you that without approval of the community authority resolution that allows for up to a 2% tax on all goods and services, the Factory 52 development would not be sustainable. That statement nearly took my breath away, and it still does. That is a showstopper, and I pray that you will thoroughly investigate the veracity of it. Trust but verify. The same PLK attorney also told you that implementing a community authority for the development was always in their plans. If true, did PLK inform any city officials early on that it was in their plans? I also pray that should you approve the resolution, you will appoint to the Community Authority Board only residents who live in Ward 3, where the Factory 52 is located. These are the residents who are most impacted by issues like traffic, parking, and other unforeseen consequences that may arise. Lastly, I ask that a town hall meeting be scheduled so that there can be two-way communication with our elected and better understanding about all things Factory 52. Thank you.
Thank you. The next request to address council is Lynn Ellis.
Before I speak, I'm going to ask you to give me a little grace because I think I'm right at that 5-minute mark. Okay, let me say a big thank you to Tran and Thomas for hosting a terrific meeting at the Buddhist Temple on Robertson. Your kindness and welcome were above and beyond. I would also like to thank Brian for facilitating the meeting with residents. You did a fantastic job, and everyone attending was very prepared and ready to help. Thank you also to Ward 3 Councilman Jeff Gurton for attending, listening, and answering questions. I appreciate all of you. I'd like to add that the Buddhist Temple will be greatly impacted by PLK. They have been servants to our community since 2001. They help so many by translating for non-English speakers, helping facilitate medical help to those in need, and many more services. They are the only Buddhist temple on this side of Cincinnati, and they serve a large community. They are not only a minority church, but they are an asset to our city that fills a void. It broke my heart to hear how devastating this development on Phase 3 could be to the temple. Not only the residents will suffer, but the caring priest at the temple and their congregation will suffer. I personally want to thank the Buddhist temple for all they do. They are definitely an asset, and it's an asset that we need to protect. I'd like to address some of the statements made by some of the council persons about the community authority in PLK. Statements such as more control, transparency, helping them be successful. I believe as taxpayers, we've already helped. Here's just a few things we've done through our tax dollars. A CRA/CRG 15-year abatement. 2 TIFs totaling $10 million for 30 years. The Ohio Air Quality Development Authority, $18.6 million. And I believe they're going to apply for the Ohio Transformational Mixed Use Development Program. Grants and programs aren't free money. They are our tax dollars. If you want a business to be successful, set them up with all the grants and programs that you can use, that they can use. We as taxpayers did that and are doing that. You also become a patron of the vendors, and that helps them be successful. How is giving a $1 million corporation and millionaires more money helping our city and its residents? Corporate welfare and greed, and I believe it was Alexis Royce that said that, and I agree with you, is not the way to help. Transparency and control. How? So a few Norwood people will sit on a board. How does that give us control? The only money we will see publicly is the authority money, not the PLK money. PLK is going to do what it wants to do. It's just a shell game. We as a city have more control over PLK with a PUD than we do this authority. There are empty storefronts on the first phase of this development. Do you honestly believe that a 2% sales tax that's tacked on to customers' bills will be a selling point to lease from PLK? I'm going to stick by the statement I made at the last council meeting that there's money issues with this company. You'll be opening Pandora's box, and other companies will want to jump onto this bandwagon. Mr. Girton pointed that out, and none of this money will benefit the city or its residents. I'm asking you to stop, please. What are the unintended consequences? The city has made big mistakes over the years with developments. Let's do something right the first time. PLK will be fine. They won't go away. I'm asking you to just vote this down. Remember, you work for us, not a corporation. This is nothing more than corporate greed. They aren't good neighbors, and they are hurting our residents, giving them no consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. The next request to address council is Marilyn Hanrahan.
Hello again. You know, at our previous meeting, it was stated that PLK could not ask for more than a 2% increase. However, I have to question this, as Section C of their petition includes the following statement. Although the facility charges can be less than the maximums stated in this section, under certain circumstances, it cannot be increased in the district without the written consent of A, the developer, B, the owners of the majority by assessed value of the property subject to the facilities charged, and C, the authority's board of trustees. This poor wording suggests that with the approval of these groups, the charge could potentially be raised beyond the 2%. Was this lack of clarity intentional? Could it have been written this way to provide the developer with flexibility to increase the charges in the future? This is a concerning issue that needs to be addressed and reworded. You know, I hope you fully understand the implications of this vote. This decision goes beyond our city. It'll set a precedent for other communities. When considering this tax, it's important to remain mindful and avoid creating a divide between residents and non-residents regarding who will bear this fee. We are all consumers. Community authorities are not widespread, resulting in a lack of data and limited understanding of their long-term consequences. And this proposal is for decades with no way out. Approving this measure could have repercussions that extend well beyond our community. It'll open the door for other businesses to impose additional charges on consumers. Again, prioritizing profit over public interest. It's been said we don't have to patronize these businesses, but soon there may be no choice as more businesses follow suit and adopt usage fees if this is approved. Many people are unaware of facility fees. These are extra charges added by healthcare providers simply for using their office space, separate from the cost of your medical care. And these fees can be very costly. Most facility fees are in healthcare, but similar type fees are now spreading to other businesses, like Factory 52. Large corporations already making millions and billions of dollars are using or trying to implement these fees to make more money off of everyday people. Factory 52 is already receiving our tax dollars through multiple TIFs and other forms of grants, etc. If you allow this fee or tax, where does it stop? What happens when more regulations or laws change and grocery stores can start adding 2% fee to your weekly grocery bill? The burden of these fees on families will only grow unless people stand up and say no. You have the power to say no, every one of you. We ask that you stand firm and protect Norwood from policies that exploit the consumers and ensure fairness over corporate greed, or again, will it stop? I would also like to echo Mrs. Ellis and thank Ms. Royce for publicly acknowledging the fact that this is nothing but corporate greed. And what I'm going to add, and I wasn't planning, I'd like to say, I was on council when PLK first came, and we were all excited with this new development. I do not recall anything about a community authority. I have asked 3 other people on council at that time, and no one was aware of any community authority being discussed or put into the proposal. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next request to address council is Brian Ferreira.
Good evening. Thank you, council, for having me. Brian Frere, a 20-year Ida Avenue homeowner and resident. Having worked with some of these ladies behind me through the past few weeks, learning more about this issue, decided to get involved and come talk to you. Thank you for your time. As far as the tax is concerned, the 2%, to me, it is a corporation's job to figure out how to afford their own bills, not ours to pay for them. As far as what I have read, that they are going to be using this fees for, things such as more live music. Those, most all of the musical events were sponsored by the breweries that are in that development. PLK is not paying for those events. The owners of the businesses are paying for those events. I hear that there is going to be no profit towards Norwood for any of this tax. It is merely a way for that corporation to take money from our neighborhood and then use it to build other places that won't benefit us at all. One such building might be the area in Hyde Park Square that they are, completely taking over. My larger concern is what they're going to use it for their Phase 3 development. As we've discussed before, and as other members have brought into attention, the street sizes are not safe for the large development they plan on putting behind our neighborhood, or in the middle of it. Between Robertson and Ida, they want to put 150 townhomes. That's at least 2 cars a home, if you're dealing with any type of family. Where are they going to park those cars? Where are all the extra cars being parked from 52 and the Phase 2 of 52? I would suggest that they use that lot for Phase 3 for overflow parking, additional green space. The speed limits and right-of-ways in the streets that they are speaking on widening, the traffic study that I have read and the parts that I have read, it is just grossly overstated or understated the amounts of traffic that was there before and are there now. I have not seen anything or any type of equipment that actually counts cars or speed through the neighborhood in any direction from 52. I would suggest to council that you would start some type of traffic study that actually has factual-based evidence versus guesstimated numbers and, information from previous businesses on what might be the employment levels. We need to know how many cars are really coming down our streets and at what speeds. As far as factory phase 3 goes for 52, I think we are looking at severe noise pollution, water runoff from overbuilding, complete overcrowding is in the neighborhood, not to mention the general aesthetic. They're just putting giant shipping containers stacked on top of each other, right on top of all of our properties. There should be more green space. They should have to leave some of the old growth trees that are around the area that provide great breaking up of both 71 noise and general traffic noise. I would request council delay or extend the readings into individual readings on all of these future hearings and readings. Cramming it all in together on the 23rd, it just seems mighty fishy to me that, they made their motions all right around the holidays when people are busy and don't have time to come to meetings. It's also dark early. I think that pretty much covers it. Again, I'm against the 2%. There's just nothing in it for us residents than more expense. It's a corporation. They're making plenty of money. Let them put some back into our community. Thank you, council.
Thank you. The final request to address council on this topic is Bishop Sonny James.
Wow. Here we go again, guys. First and foremost, as a community advocate, I really am honored to stand in support of folks like Susan Knotts, Lynn Ellis, Marilyn Hanrahan, including Brian and others. When we don't prioritize the heart of the people that are most invested in our community, it's easy for people to walk away saying we are more interested in private interests versus public interests. I want to stand before you. Number one, I want to apologize to all of those at Factory 52 that are really, really putting in their heart and everything they have to bring a wonderful addition to our community. I also want to stand publicly, Nick, the developer there, I remember when it was just dirt. And I remember he opened his doors to bring me and a group of others in. And he asked me, Bishop, what do we need to do? What would you like to see done? He didn't have to do that, guys, but he did. And the Bible says that we're to give honor to whom honor is due. So I want to say not just to POK, but to any developer coming into our great community of Norwood, Ohio. Come on in, we welcome you, and we need you. However, when I'm hearing the heartbeat of so many residents, and I'm not just talking about residents, I'm talking about people that have been elected to serve my community. And yet they have to feel like they have to come and almost plead and beg. Listen, you all know me. The reason people reach out to me, because if you're talking about creating marches, most people think marches mean something bad. But most of you can attest that they haven't. None of mine anyway. Several years ago, Mr. Bonzo can confirm this. I gave the city a 13-point plan laying out the things that we need to do as a community to take us to the next level. One of those things was community town hall meetings. Folks, we are several years later, We need to make sure that people have their voices heard publicly before you put the political process into play. And that's what these residents are asking for. While I'm speaking, I would even invite my friend to stand with me, to show that I'm not in opposition to development. But when you have people who are questioning your motives, stop. We keep hearing this narrative that you all have the power. I want to say, no, you don't. There's one energy, one entity that can give the people what they want. And that's directly from the developer. To sit down and say, okay, what have we not done for you all? You understand that I have a business right to exercise my right to help enhance my profit. I'm not necessarily against that. But before you make a decision, stand up before the people and say, okay, I made a mistake. I didn't hear you. And I'm asking the developers of PLK to stand with us and to just say, okay, guys, listen, stop. I've been there from ground level. Just stop, guys, and wait until we can have that town hall meeting. And we'll pack the place, I promise you. But don't show politics and personal private interest over the people. I'm putting my life on the line out here, bragging about my community. Let's work together. And I'm asking PLK, come to the table. We're reasonable. I hear you, I know, it's time to go. But listen, let's get this done right. And I'll stand with you. I don't want my peers saying, Bishop, we need a march. Let's work together.
Thank you. That wraps up the request to address council on this agenda item. I can, if you want, I can read the full caption over again, unless someone, right now we're at the point of Mrs. Franzen.
Okay. I'm going to lower my hand because I don't know the proper way in which to do this. My apologies.
All right.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
If I
Moore.
could, so just so council knows, so there's two paths forward. We have the one, the resolution that you have in front of you for the third reading now. In order to make that effective, you would need to amend that and add 4 names. The alternative, we also have on the agenda later an alternative version of this resolution that has some other provisions in it regarding mainly the appointment of the trustees and the way they're done. And I included in the packet a red line and the differences. So council needs to, assuming you want to move forward on this, council will need to decide which version you want to use, or if there are parts of the second one you like and parts you don't like, then you got to do something with that to figure out which parts you want and which parts you don't want. If you want to keep the original version and add some names, you're going to have to make a motion to amend it to add 4 names. That's procedurally where we are. If you want to talk about it, I would suggest somebody make a motion to have a third reading, and somebody second it, and then talk amongst yourselves as far as what path you want to take forward. That probably didn't help, but I thought it might.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
I'd like to make a motion to have the third reading.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to have the third reading of the resolution. Is there a second? Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I would love for Mr. Lingenfelter to come and give an overview of the NCA. I did forward you sorry, sir, Do you have a flash drive? That'd be lovely, thank you. Is that acceptable to have him
Yes.
come and give an overview again? So yes, please.
Mr. Lingenfeld? There should be a plug up there.
I know.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know, I see it here, but I don't see it up there.
You may have to move it over, like a screen.
I can go over it.
We can just look at this, this is really pretty. Ah. It was way pretty.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Seaver. So a couple different things that we wanted to cover and give a quick overview on. I apologize. I was out of state last meeting, or I would have been here. My name is Nick Lingenfelter. I oversee development for PLK and the Factory 52 project, and have been on it since 2019 or so. And Mr. Woodside could come up and cover some of this as well, but the original plan on Factory 52 when we did it was the city of Norwood didn't have the bonding capacity to necessarily issue all the bonds for the public improvements. So in phase one, I want to say it was around $15 million of public improvements we needed to do. There was also extensive negotiations with the school board in which the school board did not want any parks or any other spaces at Factory 52 to be funded with any TIF dollars. So we corporately funded the dog park, the public parks, everything, including all the maintenance. But because, again, the city didn't maintain it, then the Port Authority had to put it under their name. So all of those spaces are actually under the purview of the Port Authority. In order to maintain the Port Authority's ground, Norwood did not want to cover any street costs or anything else. So part of our original development agreement was always to have this new community authority in place, to have some type of maintenance mechanism should the Port Authority need that at some point. So from our standpoint, we're not trying to force this down anybody's throat. What we're trying to figure out is what is the best way to do it. But the funding mechanism always was there for some type of maintenance of these public facilities. So if any of you have a dog park or ever come to Factory 52, that's actually on PLK's land that you can now visit for free, but it's a public space that somehow has to be paid for. No different than the park. They're public spaces that have to be paid for in some capacity. We paid to build them, millions of dollars for the community. And now what we're trying to do is figure out how do you maintain them, or what is the other mechanism that we can allow those things to be maintained because we paid for the public improvements for the public because there was a shortfall in that money. So that's where the new community authority originally came in. New community authorities. This is not a new mechanism while it is newer to the Cincinnati region. There's a little over 30 of them in the Columbus market alone. New Albany first started, I believe it was 1999, and that was done originally as part of the Limited's expansion. So they've had that up there for 24, 25 years. This is not, again, a new concept. It's just not a lot of what we do down here. When we had the Port Authority work on our project, we were one of the first 4 or 5 projects in the region that actually used the Port Authority because I had been doing that in the Columbus market, and every development up there uses it. Now you see everybody in town using the same mechanisms because what it allows us to do is we can borrow at a cheaper rate or other port authorities work together. For instance, our Port Authority here locally couldn't underwrite all the bonds. Factory 52's Port Authority partners are actually the Columbus Port, the Dayton Port, and the Cincinnati Port.
because in order to get that project to come together, the infrastructure was so significant, we all had to work together to do that. So what we're trying to get to there, let's see if I can just come back out again. I may need your help here, we want to make sure that all of these facilities that we built and that are open to the public can continue to stay open to the public. Otherwise, I'll gladly shut down the dog park. We can start charging for it. But we have to have some way to make that public facility work. But the mechanisms we're allowed to use vary. So if it was, hey, it's just purely for the maintenance, that's fine. But then some people might say, well, what's in it for me? Like, I don't use your dog park. So what we had to take a look at is step back and look at our development and say, how else could we apply the funds, whether we cover one cost and the money goes to the other? It's just going from one side to the other. But it's truly still just a public source of funds that we do not have the majority of the seats on the board. I'll also point out that when an event occurs at Factory 52, we have nothing to do with it. We don't pick the bands. The bands came, most of the breweries gave, a small sponsorship dollars. Those ended up getting paid for by us corporately for the last year or two. To the tune of about 75 to 80% of all those costs were funded by us because the sponsorships are there, but they're not enough to sustain it throughout a year. Could you increase the cost of drinks? Yes, maybe. But what we want to do is say, how do we take this throughout the year? So what I wanted to show you all was, how do we kind of get to this point? So if you all remember when we started on multicolor, we did a community survey. About 650 surveys went out to the community, 430 or so were Norwood residents. And we asked people specifically, what are you looking for as we expand this development? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? And how do we do that? So this was, again, beginning of the year. And when we started working through the community authority, how we put all this together, we're taking all of this data to figure out the best way to put it forward. So the number one thing that people came back with is like, how has Factory 52 kind of affected you in the neighborhood? 52% people said it was actually the improved public spaces that we brought in. But again, we corporately paid for the majority of those because there wasn't enough money to do that under a traditional TIF scenario, and the city of Norwood didn't want to take on the maintenance. But we believe that that's important. I think roughly 40% or so of our space is truly open space to the public, and we have people that run through there, we have people that use the space, family parties, whatever it is, and it is a privately owned public space because that's how it had to be documented and done. The next thing we looked at is said, how do you think it'll actually affect the community long term, right? So the majority of people thought that, and this is again, this year after everything's open, how do people today think that it's going to actually continue to affect the community? And does it attract businesses and new residents? And that's a fact. We know that. We have roughly 500 people living there today. A lot of people are moving out, buying houses in the immediate area. They're coming into Norwood in newer spaces and looking for those opportunities. So also on the business front, we, and Sonny, we did work on this a while ago. I believe it was 65% of our businesses are minority or female owned. We made a really conscious effort to make sure that we do focus on diversity. We do focus on helping new people start businesses. If you notice a heavy Asian culture in our food hall, it's because there's a lot of immigrants that came here and wanted to open new businesses. And that's what we focused on. We focused on ways to make that busy. Our biggest event all of last year outside of City Flea was Asian New Year. We know that. And that was a big draw of people in the city of Norwood and how they came in. The next thing we kind of look at, have you actually attended events at Factory 52? So if you did, they could choose what they did. The number one attended event we have is City Flea. City Flea, we lose $5,000 to $7,000 hosting. That's what it costs to put it on. But it brings people to Norwood, and we're building a new destination. We can't sit there and say, hey, I think we sold coffee and alcohol on Saturday, a total of $7,000. That's it. It wasn't about making the money that day. It's about making this continuous destination that people come to, because prior to us building there was nothing. It is impacting the streets. It was factories beforehand. I totally understand the traffic, and I'll kind of get in that in a second. We know what it was at its peak. Yes, those were the numbers of employees when they closed, but at their peaks, we know what they were because they gave us the numbers. They had them. So we went right to US Playing Card and said, what was it, and how do we work with this? And we want to continue to improve the traffic as well. When we look at traffic, it impacts all of our neighbors, and that's important. It also impacts all of our residents. We are a business, but we also don't want to lose our income. So our residents are complaining just as much as everybody else if there is an issue, and we want to change that. There are things like we try to add a stop sign. There's a process. Can't do it. But we want to make sure that if there are issues, we are addressing them. And I'll kind of get into how we get the traffic data in a second as well. But again, when we started focusing a new community authority thing, it was truly because the majority, these are Norwood resident numbers, nobody else. They're attending all of the free events at our property. So the residents are benefiting from this directly, and they're telling us in those surveys that we collected. But here's what's going to get a little more interesting in a second. How often do you visit? Kind of talk about that. And what would draw you there more? More green spaces and more outdoor activities, more live music, and more family-friendly events. Directly from the residents of Norwood telling us what will draw them to our property. So that's why we're trying to make sure we focus on, and by the way, you'll see this is the tax dollars from people who pretty much don't live here that are helping fund these for our residents here in Norwood. How many were in the survey? There were 430 that were collected from the Norwood community. Yeah. So, what happened at Factory 52? So this is the other thing now. So we'll kind of walk into how we get it. We all have these fancy things in our pocket. We track. It's kind of scary, but Amazon tracks everybody. So you can go to Amazon and say, give me this data so we know where people are coming from, where they're driving, what routes they take, all of this we know. In the past 12 months, we had 655,000 guests, but they might have been here 2.6 times. So this is all of Factory 52. I think you heard some numbers last time from just Gatherall, but this is 252,000 unique people. Every resident of Norwood went. That's less than 10% of all the people that visit our property. And that includes the residents who live at our property. So when we're talking about people spending money, 90% of the money coming in is coming from somewhere else. I'll take them up again.
Oh.
Right there. I'll put it in. It's up there, not back here. That would go out. Yeah.
It's on this side, James. So
This one? No, you take that thing. I don't want to screw it up anymore.
that goes off on its own.
But when we get to how we look at the traffic and how we, oh, sorry. To go back again? When we talk about the visits and how this all works, and I'll give everybody this. This is not data we're hiding. You can see the biggest spikes. City Fleet is the absolute largest spikes we have, and this is drawing the most people from the region to the city of Norwood. But over a year, this shows you the data that we look at. Let me take this a step further and say, where is everybody coming from? So of all the guests that come here, yes, there's a large amount from this immediate area, whether it's Norwood, Hyde Park, Oakley, but the guests that come visit us are coming from all over the region. So we know that a lot of this stuff, well, yes, we're not directly trying to impact Norwood residents. What we're trying to do is say, let's take the money that all these other people are spending from other communities and help benefit the community the best way that we can when we do this. And then how do we figure out routes? Yes, people absolutely cut down the side streets. We know that. We've been trying to figure out how we do new wayfinding, how we do something else. We've asked the traffic engineers to address it. But if you look, and I could get more granular on it, we could tell you by intersection where everybody's traveling and how they're getting to and from it. So when the traffic data comes in, we could tell you literally every person that touches that property, how long they stay there, what they do. The average dwell time's over an hour and a half. So that's our goal. We want people to come here and stay here and spend more money here. And then ultimately, how we can then take those patterns and help alleviate stress on certain streets or improve the flows from others. So we are absolutely working with the traffic engineers on the best solutions. I know this will kind of come in on the PED conversation, but I want everybody to know, like, we understand that traffic is a concern. We are not asking, we don't want it on the side streets. What we can't stop is people using Waze or Google Maps and saying, I'm gonna take a side street anyway. We can try to stop it all we want. The technology is, we can't tell the technology not to use this street. So, but what we can do is look at wayfinding and other signage as you come in to and from the property and make sure we're trying to create as little stress as possible on all of our neighbors and residents. So, the only thing I wanted to cover real quick is, yes, you all are aware of Factory 52 Phase 1. There was a comment about the retail earlier. The retail is empty because we have actually leased our retail office for a new company to move into Norwood, Guy Point Cybersecurity. So Guy Point Cybersecurity is moving in. We are moving our leasing office into the retail. That's why it's been empty intentionally. And then next to it, where it says commercial up on the top left, We are currently building our new corporate headquarters here. We are moving our business to Norwood. 60 some odd new employees here, and it's all of our corporate staff. We are not just saying that, hey, we want to take money out of Norwood. We're physically bringing all of our employees here. And these are our highest paid people in the whole company, and we're moving everyone here, including Peter. The entire company will be located and headquartered in Norwood on our property. So I also want to talk about, because I know everybody's talking about Robertson South. There's 3 things you'll see next week or 2 weeks out. We have the phase 1 that was already part of the original plan. The pink is a multicolor, and I think the most heartache is about the stuff to the south. We're not opposed to having a meeting with the community. We've actually asked for that southern parcel to be removed right now, so I was a little caught off guard because I didn't think that that was on the agenda for the 23rd. To my knowledge, it's just the 2 to the north right now because we've asked to make some tweaks ourselves to the plan. And so just so council knows, we aren't coming for quite a few months for that southern parcel. So if there's something that is off there, I just want to clarify, we are only talking about everything to the north at this point, because that's where we're currently focusing our time. So glad to give you a little bit more if you want, but I just want to make sure I talked about how we've kind of gotten to the point we're at today and how we're trying to plan and make everything appropriate to move forward. So again, not opposed to the community about the southern properties. Everything to my knowledge that we're talking about this year is to the north, and there is actually a time limit. They have to have the hearing in so much time, but I'll let the law department kind of weigh in on that one. But again, we're only talking about the north, and it is the phase 2. We see up to the top right. So we have a mixed-use mid-rise building. Let me go right there. So the mid-rise is residential, ground floor retail. You have a hotel to the right, and the townhomes are kind of clouded stuff to the north. And what we did there was we had a lot of feedback over the last 4 or 5 years of people saying, I want a townhouse, I want something else more family-oriented. And we hear that. The one thing that we have to deal with is the multicolor site is actually, well, it's going to cost us 3 times more to remediate than the original site, because that's where all the inks and solvents came from, and that's went in the ground. So you're going to hear the Port Authority and the state actually just awarded us $1.8 million to help clean up the soil. It's actually $4 million in soil cleanup. It's a lot. And we're having to haul out over 20,000 yards of dirt because we don't want that on the ground here anymore. So it is a pretty significant change we're doing there. We're doing the townhouses for rent because of the dirty soil. They're not allowing us to sell those to individual owners. If you own that and all of a sudden we accidentally missed it, you're now liable to clean it up. So we are building the townhouses there for rent. All of our townhouses have 2-car garages. And what we really wanted to do, that's a picture of our corporate office real quick so you can see that in the front. 2-story office there. We're kind of keeping the old multicolor building. And what we want to do with the townhouses is keep these at about a 3-story height or less. If you look at the eaves of most of the houses around there, they're 32 to 35 feet. These are actually at 34. What we wanted to do was scale the project up as you come into the property. And we really wanted to keep the heart of kind of that multicolor structure in the middle. That was like kind of iconic entrance. So that is actually the new 2-story resident leasing office and clubhouse. They're moving out, so Guide Point and our company can both move into here. And then once the leasing office moves there, we're going to backfill the retail because we do have LOI signed to fill that up. So kind of one more look at what we're doing with the multicolor structure. It really was kind of this really cool industrial feel. They had these red windows, kind of in the original buildings that we tore down some of them. We kept some of the others, but we're trying to bring that back, draw the card theme throughout. And then this is what the townhomes look like. We wanted to take a residential street and match it with a residential street across. So you don't have this big 5-story monolithic structure literally casting shade on your home across the street. You now have houses that kind of meet the same look. They are a little more tight, but they are there, they have their own parking, and they really do kind of serve that family purpose that we have not yet built at the property. So we want to make sure we are providing options for all different people. I'm going to go a little off topic here, but I also want to let everybody know, because I think the other concern that we hear the most of is, what are you doing for, say, empty nesters that want to sell their home and stay in Norwood, somebody on a fixed income? We've been struggling to figure out how to do that on this property because we're not what's called a qualified census tract. So we signed the documents this afternoon, and the former Equality Insight is going to be a 55-plus senior housing project for people on fixed incomes in Norwood. So what we're going to do is JV with them. We're going to have to redo our development agreement, but we understand the concern, And we want to make sure that people have an opportunity to stay in the community if they sell their home and then continue to use all the services we're building. So, beyond that, that's kind of all I had. I went a little bit beyond the NCA, but I wanted everybody to realize, like, there is a holistic view. We want to help make sure we're answering all the community's concerns, but the NCA is just a mechanism we started with, and it's something that's kind of there because we want to make sure that we're continuing to build this community and build things. One of the things people told us they want is things on the park. I don't know if you all heard, but Congressman Landsman put us up for money at the park. So we actually spent the money, brought in the lobbyists, and hired everybody to help redo Dole Field because we heard that from the survey that that was important. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to help use our resources to help make the community better. But I can't physically go build on your park, but we can go to the federal government and say we want more money for Norwood for all these other resources. So we plan to continue to listen to everybody. Gladly we'll attend a community meeting on the south. But the new community authority really is kind of building that community hub. Norwood was the only neighborhood out of 52 in the city that didn't really have a public square. So when we started, that's what we started with. We started with the public square. We paid for those resources, built it up front. Now what we wanted is make sure we didn't build this public square that the public can't use. So gladly take any questions, and I know I talk fast.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I call you Nick?
Yeah.
Nick, thanks for coming today. I appreciate you. My first question, I have a question and then maybe a comment, but as far as your, how you can tell where people are coming from.
Yep.
How do you get that data? How do you know that someone's coming from, say, the green area or the purple area? How do you know that they're coming from that area? Just a quick, because I'm just not a...
When you download an app on your cell phone, you probably clicked off on some service you couldn't say no to.
Probably.
Every single app tracks you.
Okay.
Unless you've got software that doesn't stop it. That's why when you go to Facebook, they know
That's
that
not scary
you
at
want
all.
a new pair of base, you want a new fishing lure. They know because you were looking at another website, right? So they're doing the same
got me
software
in.
as what's tracking you on your cell phone, no different than Google Maps and everything else. So
Okay.
this is using that software. We don't own it. We pay for the data. And then we take the data and we're able to pull all this information.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate that. I feel like I appreciate everything you've done in Norwood. No matter what happens here tonight, I don't know how, I don't know where people fall on this. I for one appreciate everything you guys have done. PLK has been, as far as I'm concerned, and maybe other people have different feelings, but I think PLK has been a model developer here in Norwood. We appreciate you. And I think the administration, as well as yourself, this type of outside of the box thinking that we need and we welcome. And I appreciate all the work that you've done. I appreciate all the work that the administration has done and everybody involved in this, because it really does sound really amazing, really, no matter how I feel about it or how I come down on it. I want to say that I appreciate you, I appreciate PLK, I appreciate the administration, and I appreciate all of you out here today. And I thank all of you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions for Mr. Lingenfelter? Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, so if this should fail, what are your backup methods of recouping the cost of these things?
So there's one of two options. You go to credit card service fees, or you go increase. We can't go back and renegotiate leases. That's not fair to a tenant who signed a business. They own a business too. We're not going to renegotiate their leases. The other option is you scale back what happens there. So then you have a park, but then you don't have as much of the public coming in to use the park. So I think the city, agreed to use those TIF dollars to build a park for the public's good. Let's make sure the parks continue to be used for the general public. But we will find, you either cut back the stuff or we find a different way to charge for it. Because at this point, we corporately, but again, we were not supposed to fund most of it at all to begin with. We're now 400,000+ into it, but we're saying we want to continue this, but we can't continue it. It's not that we don't want to do more. We have to invest in the development as a business owner, but we want to continue making the service available for the community.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Hoover.
Thank you. I just wanted to share one piece of information I asked you about the other day, which was helpful, was when City Flea and events like that happen, my question was, do those vendors, are their goods and services under this fee? And they are not.
They are not, and standard, if you bought a pair of shoes, you're not paying it either. You go get your hair done, you're not paying it. It's purely on food and beverage. That is what the tax is on, and hotel nights. So as our hotel works to come open, they've signed their agreements. Hopefully we can announce it soon. one of the biggest things they're looking at is, what do I have on the weekends is a different way to make sure the hotel continues to stay full in a competitive environment. So they are absolutely on board with this as well, because they're looking at it kind of the same way. So it is on hotel nights, and I think we did the math the other day. Norwood's taxes are estimated on the hotel to be $150,000 to $200,000 a year to the city when the hotel opens. Pretty significant number. But they're looking at these things going, what keeps me full? So, but to that point, it is on food and beverage only, not on standard products. City flea, whatever happens, they're not collecting. We'd have a really hard time managing that process.
Thank you. Any other? Ms. Royce?
Do you know what the average individual spends on food and beverage on a trip?
The average ticket per person is around $14 to $17.
So 2% of $14 to $17 would be the average cost of it.
20 to 25 cents. Yeah.
Thank you, that's all I had.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? Mr. Braden?
Thank you, Mr. President. So just out of all fairness, we gave our guest tonight 5 minutes to speak, and appreciate that. And now we have just let him take a presentation. So I would like to ask your permission, with your permission, Mr. President, if there's anybody else that has anything else to say about that following his presentation, maybe we give them an additional minute or two to see if they'll come up and want to speak after the presentation. Anybody here tonight? Is that an unfair request? Maybe there's nobody. But maybe there is, and in all fairness, I'd just like to see if they want to give a response.
Are you requesting for like a minute of rebuttal from?
Anyone who would like to say anything following the presentation, I would be willing to listen to.
I will go for a minute. I don't see that as unreasonable.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Does that?
I would agree to that, and I appreciate your consideration.
Mrs. Franzen?
Do we need to like officially approve it, or is it under your
Mr. Moore,
direction?
does that fall under the purview?
It's a fine line. I mean, obviously, a council member can ask anybody that's standing here a question. Hey, can you explain this to me? Hey, can you go into more detail? Hey, what is it? What do you think about this? Any council member can do that. When we get into opening the floor, that's a different, but the president of council is in charge of the way the meeting is run, and if council doesn't like it, they can vote to overrule his decision.
Mrs. Franzen?
I can only speak for myself, but I think a minute seems fair as a quick rebuttal, since we did have so many people speak tonight before perhaps additional information may change stuff or may not change things.
All right. So I'll set it at a minute. Hold on. Anyone who previously addressed council who is interested in speaking for another minute, if you would like to, you can form a line behind Mrs. Hanrahan and go from there. I'm relying on the...
I'm not going to take a minute.
All right.
I'm not going to take a minute. That was just totally out of line and unfair to have a complete presentation that was planned, given to us after we speak with our 5-minute limits. This presentation could have been given. It was a presentation by the developer. It could have been given at any time, but to do this at the third reading, when we have already spoken and it was planned to be done this way, is just, I think, just totally unfair and out of line. Thank you.
I would like to say, I'm pretty sure that everybody on council has been put on notice from Bridget Davis, and I would take them emails seriously, just so you guys know. I just wanted to bring that to your attention, please.
Thank you.
I too feel it was unfair. He had a presentation already ready to go. Have you given any consideration to talk to the city, Cincinnati banks, of how theirs is working and compare it as what his plan is? Also, look at their board members and see if they're any different, if there's more diversity than what is proposed here. From what I understand, the founder of Moreline is on it. There's some skin in the game there. Is there skin in the game in the members that will be chosen? Because you got 3 PLK, you got 3 council, and you got a community. There's not much division there. You're saying no? How's it going to be made up?
Mrs. Bowen?
If I can just address that, there will not be 3 members of council. There will be 4 people appointed by city council. They could be any 4 people. If this original iteration of the ordinance is what we voted on, it could be any 4 people in existence, as far as I understand. If the amended edition of the ordinance passes, from what I understand, Mr. Moore, it will be 3 people who must be citizens of Norwood, or I'm sorry, 4 people who must be citizens of Norwood. One of those people is a direct representative of the city. So that could be someone who works for city administration.
So it could be someone you might pick in Ward 3 who actually would be directly affected.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I hope you look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just ask that, with all the grievances that there are, with the presentation that no one was expecting, I think this should be kicked back down and reorganized, so more information can be brought and shared, with the community. May there would be less opposition.
Thank you. Was there anyone else who had previously addressed council?
Guys, come on. We're talking about a public hearing. We're talking about making sure the public has their questions answered before you as elected officials do your due diligence. I respect everything that's been done by Nick and his team, and everything that I personally would like to see that development do. To my knowledge, they've done it, so I applaud them for that. But at the same time, when we move forward like this without hearing the public first, and to the person in charge of our DEI, I stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, when you make presentations like this at the last minute, it shows that you're more focused on administration and other groups' personal protocols and agendas than you are the people. And that is something that I stand for and put my life literally on the line to defend. We've got to stop status quo. God bless you, and I'm praying that PLK will just come to the conclusion. We can work this out before it moves forward. Please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Hi. Oh, yeah, and thanks once again for everyone coming tonight. Goodness, I don't know how to start. So I appreciate all the information we got from Mr. Lingenfelter, as well as the strong swell of opposition from people in the neighborhood. Again, like most of you, I've learned a lot about new community authorities in the past 6 weeks. I am kind of feeling that perhaps it might be best to table this resolution for next. You run into issues with the holidays if you do that, so I don't know how to kind of square that circle. But that's just a potential way forward that we could potentially digest the information that we received from Mr. Lingenfelter, as well as continue to hear from people in the community. One option would be a special meeting, which would be perhaps hard, again, with the holidays around. But I just wanted to put that out there as a potential option. I know we're on the 3rd reading now, but that's just something we could potentially do if we make a separate motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover?
I wanted to provide a point of clarity regarding the, I invited Mr. Lingenfelter to come because there was so many questions. I've seen a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion. And so I did ask him to come to provide some clarity. I reached out to the president of council for the best process, and I did ask if a special presentation would be preferred. But in our discussion, it was believed that that was a little too far outside the realm for special presentation. And so while we were having the discussion, that was decided to be the place. So there was no nefariousness. That was trying to provide clarity for people who had a lot of questions. The other thing I would say is that, the additional thing that I would say is that we have had this we have been discussing this since October. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm curious by nature. And so I have spoken to many people about this. Not only members of employees at PLK, but I've spoken with many members of city administration. I have spoken with Pat Woodside, who is the city's attorney. I believe there might be some misunderstanding that he was the PLK attorney. That's Andrew Spohr. So our own attorney has come and vetted this. I have spoken with our law director. I have spoken with the treasurer. Many conversations, also with vendors at the facility, with people who live there, as well as people who do live in the area, as well as throughout Norwood. I say all that to say I myself have done a vast amount of research on this. And I'm also aware that it feels like there's a bit of frustration with other things happening with PLK. Obviously, the construction. I did watch, and I think I shared this before, the almost 3-hour planning commission meeting. These are two separate issues, and I think it's important that we not have our frustration with parking impact our decision about an economic tool that PLK is interested in using at their business. That's just a few pieces of information.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if that was an official motion, but if it was, I'd like to second it as far as this table.
We already have a motion on the floor for the third reading, so that would have to be.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. My apologies.
Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what Mrs. Hoover is saying, I think that it's important to clarify that regardless of how each individual on council votes on this is neither an endorsement nor a, swearing off of PLK, of their business practices, of phase 2, of phase 3. This is a separate issue. This is a separate entity that we are voting on. And so I think it's important to be able to separate those things. This is, not at all signing off on construction practices, on traffic flow. Those are things that we will address at future council meetings, but the focus here, the issue that we are voting on that is at hand, is the new community authority. And so I'd like to try to keep the focus on that as much as possible currently. While I'm not at all opposed to a town hall, we did host a public hearing on this issue on November 12th, so I do just want to clarify that there was indeed a public hearing, which we are obligated to do. So we could not have been to this point without having had one. I do know that as more information has come out about this, there are definitely more questions that have arisen. I think it is absolutely reasonable for people to have questions and to have them answered. Just a point of clarity that there was a public hearing November 12th. I did have a question, which I'm not really sure. I feel like this may be a Mr. Moore question. The amended, would there be a potential to further amend that?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. Council can amend, until it's passed, council can amend it in kind of any way they want, assuming I say that's not totally illegal. And then you can always, well, probably not with this, but this, I would not come back in another meeting or two and decide, I didn't like what we passed. We need to fool with it some more. So, yeah, council, we can amend either the one you have in front of you on the third reading or the alternative that was presented. Yeah, council can make a motion to make an amendment. Any amendment of length needs to be in writing according to the rules, just so we don't make a lot of mistakes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Mr. Braden?
Yeah, as I'm trying to wind down, and I know nobody wants to hear from me anymore, but I just want to make sure, because we just said a lot there, but we are voting on a third reading on a tax increase and to our residents. And we just got finished voting in, or you all just got finished voting in, a increase on our building department fees. And so as we just sit here and nonchalantly and willy-nilly just act like we're raising fees on this, raising taxes on that, I just want to really think about what we're doing as a body. And as we just raise prices on everybody, we need to realize, how many people own homes, on this body? How many people use the building department on this body? How many people go to factory? So we just sit around and nonchalantly raising taxes. So I won't, I really weigh very heavily on my shoulders. So that's it. I'm trying to be the last statement for me. So thank you.
Ms. Royce. Ms. Royce.
I'll wait.
Thank you,
Ms.
sir.
Royce.
Thank you. I just want a point of clarity. I mean, we did just raise the building fees. What we're doing tonight is a fee on optional goods, and it's not, the city does not benefit from it. So I don't want to conflate those two things.
So why are we doing it?
I mean monetarily.
Mr. James, please.
I would like to point out, we sat quietly while you all talked. I would like to point that out. We're here to listen, and we did. Okay. Oh, I mentioned it last time. I do appreciate, I brought up the words corporate greed, but I was referencing it because other people had brought it up. And I conceded that PLK is a profit-driven company. I don't think that's a secret. They're a business. But the same thing that Ms. Bowling just pointed out, my concern is they will get these fees another way. And in this scenario, we would have 4 people from the community who could have input on how this chunk of money is spent. If we do not, in a world where we do not vote yes on this, then we have no input. It is just profit and they can spend it however they like. So we lose a say, we lose a voice in some of those funds. That's it, I'm done.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, so I had a feeling that credit card processing fees may be a different way that they would go to recoup the costs of this public programming. So I did a little bit of digging into credit card processing fees and what the legalities are surrounding that. And there are quite a few laws that you have to follow with credit card processing fees. And I got different information from different places. But it looks like those fees could be considerably higher and in some cases double what the community authority percentage is. And obviously that wouldn't apply for folks who are paying in cash. It is based on what fee the credit card companies are charging you to process card transactions with their cards. But in some places it looked like 4% was a fee that you could have to pay additionally should you choose to pay with a credit card. I think at the end of the day, the money is going to come from somewhere. PLK is a for-profit company. They are going to find a way to recoup the cost of this public programming. What I would hate to see would be for this public programming to cease, would be for these public places to no longer be available to the public. I would hate to see the dog park be a membership-based or a fee charge. I would hate to see these live music events cease. I would hate to see City Flea cease. I work with City Flea at my day job, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of vendors who depend on events like that in order to keep their small businesses alive. Those are huge, huge business opportunities for those vendors who participate in City Flea. I would hate to see that public programming cease to exist or diminish in some capacity. At the end of the day, PLK is going to find a way to make this money. My preference would be that the spending of that corporate spending be in the hands of the community, and with a board that is majority community members who are appointed by city council, there is a level of transparency because it would be a public entity, which would be subject to public records requests. I know it was asked earlier if we had looked into the banks. We actually did a public records request from the bank's community authority to look at what their spending was looking like. So the answer to that is yes, and not in an improv way. I think that the interest of this is going to be, at the end of the day, the money is coming from somewhere, be it raised prices, be it the next round of leases are more expensive, which would cause the food to cost more because the businesses who are writing the leases need to be able to pay those rent, or be it from credit card fees. The money is going to come from consumers one way or another. That is unfortunately how for-profit businesses work. I would rather there be a level of transparency and a level of putting that spending control in the hands of the community. And I think that this allows that. So that is where my support of this issue is coming from. I think that there needs to be oversight to where that corporate spending is going. And I think that this gives the community majority control on a board that would provide that oversight. Otherwise, there is absolutely nothing stopping a credit card fee from being implemented and that spending be lining profit or lining pockets of CEOs. That could be just increasing payroll for all of the employees. I'm not saying that that's what PLK is doing. I have no idea. But the point is we would never have any idea because they would never have to be transparent about where that spending was going. This provides a level of transparency that we otherwise are not going to have available to us. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Could I just speak?
You can have your minute.
Thank you. Yes, you make a very good point that PLK is a for-profit company, and being a former business owner, I understand that, and that's why you're here, to make a profit. Totally get it. The thing I have an issue with is you get the fee, and Norwood gets nothing out of it. Now, okay, you're going to get it the other way. You raise your credit card fees, you raise your drink prices, your dog fees, but you're a for-profit company. You shouldn't be, compensated in this way, I feel. And I think the most important thing is the precedent you set. So what other company can ask for this? And I think that you just opened the door for that. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll make this very short. I know I just spoke. I've had this thought a few times throughout the last few meetings, and I keep meaning to say it, and I keep not. This is a business practice that PLK would like to implement. If the community does not support this, and the community chooses to stop going to PLK and spending their money on food and beverage, that will be a failed business practice, and in order to be a sustainable business, they will have to pivot. I'm not saying that to encourage anyone not to go there. I am saying that to say this is optional. It is a choice that PLK is wanting to make. It is no different than implementing a credit card fee. I think that this will either work or it will not, and ultimately that is not the city endorsing PLK. That is not any reflection of our feelings on Factory 52. This is a economic development tool that PLK would like to implement, and it could be very successful, and it also could fail. And we have no control over how that goes. That is entirely up to the community. That is entirely up to how people support it. That is entirely up to everyone else. All we are doing is signing off on, you can attempt this business practice. We can form an entity that will allow you to put this into place. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
Two things. One, I want to talk about the idea of a town meeting. One of the things that was very clear was that council wasn't fully abreast of some of the things that were happening, including the NCA. I didn't know about it until October. It does turn out that PLK has been talking about this for years. They've been talking about a lot of different things, but this was one of the things that they had planned to use. And actually, I found an agreement from 2021, I believe, where it's referenced. That was before my time on council. I think it would be very helpful if, and I mentioned this to, the other gentleman from the Sherman Avenue project, that if we could have the developers come to the small business committee, that we could have more of that informal, robust conversation and dialogue. I'm sorry, I forgot his last name, Tyson. Thank you. He thought that was a fine idea. Mr. Lingenfelter said that would be something that they could do. So I think that one of the challenges is that this board is not a part of these conversations with what's happening. That is all city administration. And so we need to find a better way, I believe, for council and then therefore the residents to know what's happening. And right now that we just don't have a great process for that. So that is something that I'm going to suggest moving forward. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garten, you had your hand up earlier.
Yes, sir. I've made my feelings about this known in the past, and I'm not changing anything. Something that's not been said is that by creating this board of trustees, we're adding more bureaucracy to the city. And we're doing that so that Factory 52 can benefit from it. And yes, maybe our residents get a secondary benefit from it, from the amenities. But again, we're creating more work for probably Mr. Powers to be on this board, and then for, well, I just assume that he's the person that gets nominated for that one position. But we're adding more bureaucracy, and we're not getting anything out of this directly from Norwood. We're asking public tax dollars to go to a for-profit company, and I'm just not okay with that.
Any other discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hopefully my last, but I want to just jump on Ms. Hoover. I appreciate your comments, but there's a lot of discussion that developers and builders have with administration that we are not privy to. And the fact that we want to act like we should be privy to that, I don't, we have our own roles, we have our own lanes, and we should probably stay in them. And when the administration has talks with developers and they make, these are perfectly legal talks, they make deals, they do this, they do that, and these are legal. This is what happens behind closed doors. We are not privy to that, and we should not be privy to that. So I want to say that. I'm not challenging you in any way. I heard that statement that you would like to be more aware. I think there's a process. I think it works. And we have 2-year terms, and we need to really realize that we have a 2-year term, and it could be over. And that's the reason why we're not in all those talks, and we're not in privy to all that stuff. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Franzen.
So motion on the table is the third reading. I'm happy to vote yes on that. My final vote is, I think, no on the New Community Authority. I see the benefits, I see the drawbacks. I think for me, the drawbacks outweigh the benefits. But I'd also, again, be happy with tabling it. I consider myself, I'm trying to be part of a deliberative body, so I'm deliberating. And I get new information, I reconsider. I think that is kind of the main question that we should probably figure out. I would also ask, after we do whatever vote we do for this particular ordinance, if we could have a 5-minute recess to use the facilities. That would be lovely. Thank
Second.
you. I will make a separate motion for that. That's just something I would like to establish, I think, probably for a lot of people in here. So yeah, my feeling right now is probably we should just do the third reading, vote yes or no, and then decide if we want to table this or pass or not pass this resolution. Does that seem reasonable to all of you?
Mrs. Bowling.
I do have a question. If I am interested in discussing the amended version of this ordinance, what is the timing for that? Do we have to wait until we get to that?
Mr. Moore?
Council can make, you can talk about it now. Again, the thing is, if we're going to have the names in there, you have to amend one of them to add the names, and then have 3 readings. So it might make sense to table the whole thing, or perhaps put it in committee to figure out which version council wants, because we haven't even gotten the discussion of like, are we okay, do we want to limit the board members to Norwood residents? Do we want to, I can't even remember what the other ones were at this point. It was like, does the mayor propose replacements, those kinds of things. So that might be the best way forward, given the confusion where we are.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I know that you were making making amendments to this up until the deadline. So what I feel might be the best way forward, that I think would be best, is do the third reading, vote to table this resolution, and then when we get to that first reading of that ordinance, also table that. That puts them, perhaps maybe not table, send to committee, perhaps the small business committee. That could also be an opportunity to have a more one-on-one discussion where it's not just we talk and then you have to listen, or vice versa. either way would be fine with me. I just want to make sure that, I perhaps can see my son here in about 2 hours or so.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question to the law, Mr. Moore. Does he, do we have do you have a list of names for this, if we do choose to go that route?
Mr. Moore?
Do you have that already?
I have a number of names. I can't put the names in because I don't know who council wants. I mean, I can put names in, but if there's, oh no, only 3 of us want this person, that's what I need, is I need council, I need 4 people on council to vote to add a name, to nominate somebody or to put them in there. You need 4 people to approve that. I can't do it.
So we do have names, we just don't, we're just ready to insert them. Okay.
Mrs. Bowling.
Yeah, I am personally, there are a lot of things that I prefer about the amended version of this ordinance. I like the implementing of term limits. I like some of the other changes that were made. I am in full support of tabling this because I think that, and I think there are some additional amendments that could stand to be made that would benefit the community.
So the current motion on the floor by Mrs. Hoover and seconded by Ms. Royce is to have the third reading of the resolution. If you both are open to withdrawing that motion and/or amending it to, well, I don't want to speak on behalf of council, but based on some of the discussion, if you are interested in placing it into Small Business and Economic Development Committee for further discussion to iron out the differences between the 2 resolutions that are on the agenda this evening, as well as discussion over the individuals who have expressed an interest to be on that authority. I put that in. Mrs. Hoover.
I just want to say one thing first, because I think, Mr. Braden, you didn't understand my comment, which is exactly, I think, this, which is we would have the opportunity to have this discussion in the Small Business Committee or another committee where 2 months ago, 6 months ago, PLK could have come and done a presentation on the NCA and could have bypassed a lot of this confusion. So that's what I was suggesting. Not that we need to be in the room where the sausage is being made, but when they have information to share, that they can do it through that process rather than this.
Thank you.
Which does not feel very
I hope I didn't offend you.
productive.
My apologies.
Unoffended, thank you, sir. Just wanted clarity.
Thank you.
I'm willing to amend my motion.
So you will withdraw your motion to have the third reading.
And I would like to have it put in the Small Business and Economic Development Committee, and my request is that happen sooner rather than later.
For both of the resolutions.
Correct, please.
Okay. Ms.
I will
Royce?
second.
You will amend?
Yes.
All right. So the motion on the floor, the removal of the third reading of the resolution, placing this resolution as well as resolution number 6, which is the amended version, placing both of those matters into the Small Business and Economic Development Committee. Mrs. Bowling.
Very quickly, just to give everyone as much notice as possible, if we want this to happen quickly, there is a Small Business and Economic Development meeting on Monday, the 16th, this upcoming Monday at 6:30 p.m., and that is likely what we would place it into, just so we could have that conversation and so that everyone has as much notice as I can give.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I want to go home too. I would.
We have 7 more.
I'm going to try to go. I would suggest after the holidays. That's my suggestion. Instead of trying to rush it through, I would suggest we get through our Christmas and then we rethink this. But that's just a suggestion for me. Take it as you may.
Yes.
So that, I will just note that is not part of the motion. That can
The only thing I
be,
was clarifying was she said something about the committee immediately. So that's all. So the people prepare for the committee meeting. That's all. I apologize. Yeah.
understood. All right. So, to repeat, the motion on the floor, Mrs. Hoover and Ms. Royce agreed to withdraw their motion to have the third reading of the resolution. The new motion is to place this resolution as well as the amended resolution, which is item number M6 on the agenda, placing both of those items into the Small Business and Economic Development Committee. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Girton.
Why are we kicking the can down the road? We've had our 3 readings. I don't understand how tabling this and putting it into committee is going to do anything other than slow the process down.
I'd like to see a vote too.
Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Are we voting on tabling this right now?
This is placing it in the committee.
Placing it in the committee? Oh, no.
Mr. Girton?
No.
Mr. Braden?
No.
By a motion of 4 to 3, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item on the agenda.
Jeff.
Mrs. Bowling.
I'd like to make a motion, we have a 5-minute recess.
Oh, yes, I did. Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Motion on the floor is to have a 5-minute recess. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes. Motion carries. We will take a 5-minute recess. All right. Council is refreshed and back to continue with the agenda. So moving on to the next item. This is an ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan, for the property known as 1631 Sherman Avenue, Hamilton County, parcel number 651-0049-0073-00, a 108-unit apartment development known as the Sherman Avenue Apartments. Mr. Gurton.
Is it procedurally possible to have the second and third reading of this?
You can move to suspend the rules and have the second and third reading
I would
of
like to do that then. For
Most-
the Sherman,
for this ordinance.
what was the name of the place? The
Sherman Avenue Apartments. That's the way it appears in the ordinance.
Yes.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Gurton is to suspend the rules and have the second and third readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
That was also going to be my question, so I'd like to second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the second and third readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan for the property known as 1631 Sherman Avenue, Hamilton County, parcel number 651-0049-0073-00, a 108-unit apartment development known as the Sherman Avenue Apartments. Ordinance approving the final planned unit development, PUD plan for the property known as 1631 Sherman Avenue, Hamilton County, parcel number 651-0049-0073-00, 108-unit apartment development known as the Sherman Avenue Apartments.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to pass the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. And I will acknowledge that I accidentally skipped over this large packet. This was the resolution authorizing disposal of personal property and declaring an emergency. And there is one request to address council on that matter, and that is William Lewis.
Thank you, council. What an evening. Man, Civics at its best. This is great. Love it. First time I've ever been to a city council meeting and addressed the council. I'm a lifelong Norwood resident, my third generation at that. My grandfather owned a gun shop on Montgomery Road, opened in 1963, sold it in 1983, called Jack's Gun Shop. Brother that just retired from the police department, so Norwood means a lot to us. Norwood's been in a fiscal emergency since 2016, right? So it should be in the best interest of Norwood to dispose of assets in the most effective way that's going to maximize revenue for the city. Most people don't want to talk about firearms as assets, but that's actually what they are. They're assets. Just non-tangible items that, much like a hammer, everybody knows the saying. But has anybody done their due diligence to understand the value that is going to be destroyed here? Just one quick glance, and there's probably an item that's a World War I Colt 1911, you can tell by the serial number. It could be a $5,000 to $7,000 item. That's just one quick glance, and there's 130 items, 149 items on this. This could be extreme value to the city while in a fiscal emergency. I don't believe any financial advisors would advise anybody to destroy assets. They would advise you to turn that into cash, liquidate. There are 13 states that actually require police departments and city councils and city governments, county agencies to actually sell items, confiscated items at auction. I happen to own an auction company. I'm a founder, partner, and chief business officer for Lewis and Grant Auctions. Our focus is historical arms and armor. We've worked with many museums, some we've signed non-disclosures with, but proud to say that we helped with the acquisition of 2 items for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That's an honor for us. But that's how we treat these items. These are artifacts that need to have the story told in that manner. And so just a quick glance at this item and having a negative thought, you're going to vote to destroy hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I just don't understand how you could vote to destroy hundreds of thousands of dollars when you're in a fiscal emergency. The state of Kentucky, they happen to be one of the 13 states that require the disposal of confiscated items at auction. Last year that they reported was 2022, and they did $1.1 million. And they had a breakdown, and don't hold me to these numbers, but it was something like 80% went back to the police departments, 20% went back to the Department of Homeland Security. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that these items could be turned into cash that could help in a meeting like this, when I've heard that we're raising fees, looking at other options to create income. This list right here is the perfect way to do it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank Mr. Lewis. Thank you for showing up tonight and with that presentation. Well, I appreciate you holding out for such a long evening here. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Love government, especially
Amen.
All right, that was the only request to address council on that item. And this item that is up for consideration for the second reading is a resolution authorizing disposal of personal property and declaring an emergency. Mr. Garten.
Make a motion for the second reading?
Motion by Mr. Garten to have the second reading of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
Just a point of clarification, we do have that any current resale value of less than $1,000 is in the resolution, just for some clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Braden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. There's also something in, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but something in the resolution that says that our police officers are able to buy these for $1. Is that something that
their own?
This was discussed last time. Maybe that was not not there. So,
yeah.
Mrs. Hoover.
They're allowed to purchase their own firearm.
The service weapon that they use.
Yes, not from this list.
Not from that list.
Is that correct?
Well, their service weapon could be on that list if
Mr.
they chose.
Bonzo.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. President. Their service weapon very well could be on that list if they chose to not buy it. But police officers do in our ordinance have the option to buy their service weapon for $1 or for some nominal.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bonzo, I can barely hear you.
Police officers do have the ability to buy their service weapon, but they likely weren't using a World War I, firearm as their service weapon, so they wouldn't have had the option
To buy it as a service weapon.
To buy it,
or to buy their own
to buy their own service weapon that they could then keep themselves because maybe they have some attachment to it because they used it during their career or something like that. So.
My misunderstanding.
Yep.
Sorry.
Thank you. Motion on the floor by Mr. Garten, seconded by Mrs. Bowling, is to have the second reading of the ordinance, of the resolution. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Garten?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the second reading of the resolution.
A resolution authorizing disposal of personal property and declaring an emergency.
Thank you.
Mr. President, point of order. I want to make a motion to reconsider our previous vote on sending the resolutions to committee.
So motion 15 to reconsider,
Yes.
and that was, hold on, let me get back to that one. The one regarding the Factory 52.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the motion I have.
Motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen is to reconsider the Factory 52 resolutions, the motion.
The motion to send to committee the resolutions for about Factor 52 NCA.
All right.
I don't know.
Is there a second to that? Mr. Gerton?
I second the motion.
Second by Mr. Gerton. Any further discussion? Mrs. Franzen?
The reason I'm doing this, and I apologize in advance for bringing this up again, I feel like most of us have probably thought about this enough. I know that we got some new information tonight, but it's information that, upon further deliberation, as I had some time to breathe and go to the bathroom, I don't think I'm going to be changing my vote to a yes. I feel like I'm going to be voting no on this, even with the amendment. I feel like any further discussion is just going to drag this out, increase confusion, and frankly, it's not fair to PLK either to have it be drawn out so long. So, and again, I apologize. Because I don't talk to anyone about this, I wasn't aware that apparently I was the deciding vote, really, and I get to be the first one going. So that's kind of where I am, and I would invite folks to reconsider it and just, I don't know if it would be appropriate to just table it or vote it down. I don't know what the correct procedural way to prevent it from going forward would be, so that perhaps if someone wanted to put another NCA, a different resolution on the table in 6 months or whatever, that could happen. That's kind of my feelings. I would love to hear from Mr. Moore about, please help, how might I best
Mr.
do
Moore?
this in the best way and least annoying way?
Well, if you put it in committee, and the committee never reports it out, it's dead. If you can vote, if you bring it back, you can vote to table it indefinitely, which kind of kills it. Either one of those would be essentially appropriate. If you had 4 people that voted that way, that would send a pretty obvious signal.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I think that we should table it indefinitely.
You gotta reconsider, you gotta do the motion.
Correct.
reconsider
I
first.
apologize. I'm saying,
Mrs. Franzen?
as a continued comment, I would say that right now we have the motion to reconsider. I'm going to vote yes on that. You're welcome to vote. However, if it passes, I feel that we should vote to table it indefinitely. That is what I feel would be the best way forward, because, again, I really struggled with this. I did go back and forth on whether I wanted to say yes or no to this NCA, but I think ultimately I'm on no. But I see how people go the other way, and I just want everyone to know, I really took your comments to heart, and everyone else's comments on council. So, thank you.
Thank you. So the current motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Mr. Garten, is to reconsider this resolution. Mrs. Bowling?
Very quickly, I'm interested in putting it in committee solely for the purpose of having more discussion with both PLK and with the community to see if there's something that we can do to amend this so that it is more copacetic for everyone who's involved. I think there probably is a middle ground that we can find that would keep a lot of folks happy, and I'm interested in pursuing that, so.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor, once again, is to reconsider the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
No.
Ms. Royce?
No.
Mrs. Bowling?
No.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
By a vote of 4 to 3, the motion carries.
Okay.
Mrs. Franzen?
I'm going to make a motion to table indefinitely then.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to table to a time uncertain.
Yes, thank you.
Is there a second? Mrs. Winterbauer?
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer.
Ghost.
Any discussion? Mrs. Franzen?
And I appreciate Mrs. Bowling's, I think we should continue to discuss it, and we should discuss what NCAs could be in the future. I mean, from a personal standpoint, the 1% hotel tax, I have no problem with. Hotel tax, don't care about. I think the thing that tipped me over is looking at the other NCAs, 2% I think is just too high for the retail, and also all the negative public comment. So that's, and again, I am sorry that I didn't do this in the first place. I intended to vote no. I kind of got into well, it was a lot of discussion. So thank you all for reconsidering.
Motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer, is to table this resolution to a time uncertain. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
No.
Ms. Royce?
No.
Mrs. Bowling?
No.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
By a vote of 4-3, 4 in favor, 3 against, the motion carries. Mr. Braden?
I don't know if I'm out of turn here. I apologize if I am. I do have one last request before we close the meeting here. I don't know.
We still have, we got a bunch of...
So I would just make a motion that we consider, once again, our public meetings, our public hearings on the 23rd. Is it 23rd? Is that, or, yeah, it's the 23rd?
September 23rd.
I would make a motion that we postpone them until after Christmas. And that would be a motion that I would make if unless it's inappropriate for me to do so at this time, sir.
Mr. Moore? Just from the purposes of already having advertised those public hearings.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Our PUD, the code, our zoning code says that council shall consider the report from the planning commission and shall have 60 days from the date on which it receives the report to consider and approve, deny, or approve with modifications, provided that time may be extended by mutual consent of the developer and the city. So I'm going to recommend against changing the date of the public hearing. After the public hearing, if council wants more time to talk about it, the council can say to the developer, we're not ready to make a decision today. Are you okay with us putting this off for a couple of weeks? But if we absolutely have to have the public hearing within that window. And if we push it back any further, it's not going to be. So we got to have public hearings on the 23rd.
I appreciate that. Can I respond?
Mr. Brady?
Just because I know you're right, and I'm probably going to be, but we can't
That's
start
in
the
the minutes,
process
right?
over. Yeah, you heard it. Write that down. Let me say it on my phone. Anyway, we can't start the process over. There's no way of us to we can't start that process over for a new public hearing.
We can't do it within, and still have time for council to consider it within 60 days from when we got the letter from the planning commission. Because if we're going to schedule it, you're going to have to schedule it for the second meeting in January in order to have time to advertise a new public hearing for 30 days.
And that we can't do that.
We cannot do that.
Okay, I appreciate you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling?
Is this an option through the chair, Mr. Moore? Could we have the hearing on the 23rd, get with the developer, ask for additional time, and advertise a second public hearing date? If the developer agreed to an extension of 60 days.
Mr. Moore?
Yes, sort of. Council could advertise, I'm not sure who sees it in the in the newspaper, but certainly we could publicize the fact that, council's going to be talking about this again at the, whatever meeting that happens to be. But, you can do that. It wouldn't be the same, you would be required to do the same 30 days. You've already had the public hearing. But obviously, council's open for people to come and comment on things at every single meeting council has. Yeah. And so if it's continued, I'm not sure how you want to publicize that and let people know that council will be talking about it. But certainly you could take out another ad and put it in the paper or put it on the Facebook or whatever you wanted to do.
So as another point of clarity or option, could council, assuming that the public hearings remained and the issue is allowing more time to discuss the matter, could council not still keep the public hearings as scheduled on the 23rd there is typically an ordinance in favor of and against all of those matters. Council could have the first reading at that meeting for the ordinances in support and against of those, both of those matters, so that the second reading moves discussion further into the first meeting in January for the second reading, which also allows additional time for residents to address council on that meeting. Procedurally, that would be,
Correct.
thank you. Mr. Braden.
I will concede to that. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Moving on to the agenda, the rest of the agenda. We are now on introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. The first is an ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mr. Girton.
I second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Girton. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance ratifying the bids received and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ms. Royce.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Ms. Royce to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Ms. Royce.
I would like to invite Mr. Powers to come up and speak, and I know the mayor isn't here to sing his praises, so I would love for all of us to do it when he's done.
Mr. Powers.
Good afternoon, or evening.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good morning.
So we are very happy to be able to bring this today. We initially took this out to bid. The bids came in about $1 million over the estimates, which is not what you ever want to see with bids. $1 million under is a lot more celebrating than $1 million over. Fortunately, we were able to work with Hamilton County. After we passed the legislation this evening that has to deal with Elm Avenue, well, which includes later on an agreement with Hamilton County to extend us the additional $1 million to allow us to do this project. This will be on the county commissioner's agenda next week for their final approval, and then we will be able to carry forward and remove this problem. Be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, that's.
Mrs. Bowling.
I just want to say, for a minute there, it was very scary, and it looked like this project was dead in the water. And Mr. Powers, you have nearly single-handedly saved this project, and I think you deserve all of the praise in the world for this.
I would push that praise towards the folks at Hamilton County who really supported us on this.
We'll share.
That's very generous of you, but I'm going to let you have it all.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I appreciate that.
Ms. Royce.
Yeah, I know streets have been talked about a lot tonight, so I did just want to mention, I mean, this is a street that's been flooding for decades. I mean, I know there were attempts to fix it previously, but it's really been a neglected area. So the fact that we got this through, I know Mr. Kelch worked before Ms. Bowling was here on it, and I know the mayor and you have worked on this tirelessly. And our last meeting talking about it was so sad. And we were, I think everyone on the board was like, or at our committee meeting said, I don't know where to get $1 million. So I'm so happy. I'm so happy this is happening, and it's going to be a material improvement on a lot of people's lives. And I'm so happy something wonderful is happening tonight. So I may be overreacting, but I don't think I am. So thank you so much.
Mrs. Franzen.
And one thing that, not to cool the celebration, but I know that there's still issues with easements. Has there been any progress on that?
So there is legislation on the agenda for this evening to authorize me to talk with folks about easements that we would need from some residents' properties. So if that's approved, we'll be able to start talking with them about that, making sure that everybody gets compensation for anything that needs to be done in and around their properties.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Braden.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Powers, thank you for your work on this. This is pretty vital infrastructure that we need. I do want to thank Hamilton County and all involved. If they are, whoever was involved in this, I want to thank them, and I want to encourage, as I will be. My last property acquirement was in that vicinity, so I will be affected by this. And I want to encourage all the residents in that area to join in with us to help eliminate this issue for some neighbors that are really struggling with this. And as you go forward and you start talking to those residents, I endorse this. I have a property in that area. I'm going to endorse the city fixing that, and I hope, my wish is that all the residents in that area join in with us and help relieve this.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Ms. Royce, seconded by Mrs. Bowling, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance ratifying the bids received and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ordinance ratifying the bids received and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ordinance ratifying the bids received and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we enthusiastically pass this.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to enthusiastically pass this ordinance. Mr. Braden.
I second that.
Seconded by Mr. Braden.
With enthusiasm.
With enthusiasm, absolutely. I match your enthusiasm, slowly.
Any further any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes. Yes, sorry.
You're good. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is an ordinance superseding Ordinance 51-2024, which superseded Ordinance 47-2024, which amended Ordinance 18-2009, implementing Section 3735.65 through 3735.70 of the Ohio Revised Code to establish a community reinvestment area in the city of Norwood to revise certain procedural requirements and reflect changes in state law and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all three readings of this ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I just want to verify that I've read everything and comprehending this correctly. So currently, if it's purely residential, they don't have to go through committee or anything like that to get the CRA. If there is a small lot of commercial on this property, so say 200 apartments and one little commercial space, they have to go through that process of coming to the city, applying for the CRA. This would change it to say this room is commercial, and then the other parcels are residential, and having separate CRAs for that. Am I right with that or not?
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Right, so if it's all residential building, there's a process. They submit paperwork to the building department, 100% abatement it goes, and that's it. If it's a commercial property, It's not as much of an abatement without school board authority, and they need an agreement with council. This deals with mixed-use buildings, and it allows an owner of a mixed-use building or building a new mixed-use building to divide the ownership of the commercial part of that building into one parcel. So like that's a condominium, so it's separately owned, and then a separate parcel for the residential units in that building. And the commercial part goes through the commercial process. You have to have an agreement with council. The residential would go through the residential process just through the building commissioner. We had some discussions, and the way our code was, if it was mixed use, it was commercial. We treated it as commercial, and the thought was that, well, we would like mixed use. There are buildings we would like to be mixed use buildings, as opposed to purely residential or purely commercial, and we don't want to disincentivize the mixed use as opposed to, oh, I'll just make it all apartments. And so that's what this change does. There's a new version on your desk tonight that's tweaking some of the language, but it doesn't change the effect. I got feedback from our attorneys and developer attorneys and on slightly tweaking the language, but that's the purpose of this ordinance.
Thank you. Any further comments or discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance superseding Ordinance 51-2024, which superseded Ordinance 47-2024, which amended Ordinance 18-2009, implementing Sections 3735.65 through 3735.70 of the Ohio Revised Code to establish a community reinvestment area in the city of Norwood, to revise certain procedural requirements and reflect changes in state law and declaring an emergency. Ordinance superseding Ordinance 51-2024, which superseded Ordinance 47-2024, which amended Ordinance 18-2009, implementing Sections 3735.65 through 3735.70 of the Ohio Revised Code to establish a community reinvestment area in the city of Norwood, to revise certain procedural requirements and reflect changes in state law and declaring an emergency. Ordinance superseding Ordinance 51-2024, which superseded Ordinance 47-2024, which amended Ordinance 18-2009, implementing Sections 3735.65 through 3735.70 of the Ohio Revised Code to establish a community reinvestment area in the city of Norwood, to revise certain procedural requirements and reflect changes in state law and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
I got a little comment. Can
Okay.
I make a comment, please? With risk of going out of order. So notice there's an emergency clause on this, and is someone going to tell me that there's a time, sensitive issue here, or can we vote on this? We have to vote right now, so I feel like I want to do a little more research, maybe bring some questions, Law Director and Ms. Winterbauer. Do we have to vote on this tonight? Is there a time sensitive, or can we postpone this maybe till next meeting?
Just to clarify, we just had all three readings of the ordinance, and the next motion will be to pass.
I do understand that.
Okay.
I do understand that. My question is there a way around that? We can't postpone this till next meeting? So I can do a little more research before I think passing it is probably the okay, but I just want to make sure that there's nothing in there that might jump out at me. Or not. We can go for a vote.
I was going to offer Mr. Bonsall an opportunity to respond.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So I did have the opportunity to, review and interact with the city administration regarding this ordinance. And basically, right now there's current development kind of happening in the city, and there's things that potentially could be proposed that this directly affects. And this encourages essentially mixed-use components to this development where we wouldn't have that before. So for the city, mixed use is usually a very good thing because we get earnings taxes from the jobs, we get earnings taxes from the profit that's generated at the site, and it just makes a lot of times for just more vibrant communities when you can walk to places that have like commercial uses instead of just only having apartment buildings at a development. So, you know, I would just encourage, since they are just very I think there is actually some changes that probably need to be made to the CRA in general going forward, but I would just say this amendment, I would recommend that you all just pass it because it directly has an effect on development that might come forward in the future. And it would make that development better because it could have mixed use.
I appreciate that explanation. Thank you so much.
Any further discussion? All right, is there, Mrs. Franzen?
Yep, I'll make a motion that we pass this ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Mrs. Hoover?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
No.
With a vote of 6 in favor, 1 against, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is an ordinance ratifying the bids received and authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency.
Okay.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion to suspend the rules and have all three readings?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to acquire easements on real estate to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to acquire easements on real estate to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to acquire easements on real estate to provide storm sewer and water detention on Elm Avenue and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Mr. Gerton.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Under advisement of my advisors, I will abstain from this vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mr. Garten, is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
You still,
Mr. Braden?
Abstain.
thank you.
Thank you.
Vote of 6 in favor, 1 abstention, the motion carries. Moving on to next item, resolution creating Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project Fund and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings?
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the resolution.
Resolution creating Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project Fund and declaring an emergency. Resolution creating Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project Fund and declaring an emergency. Resolution creating Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project Fund and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion to pass the resolution? Mrs. Hoover.
Make a motion, we pass the resolution.
Is there a second? Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Abstain.
With a vote of 6, 4, and 1 abstention, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Oh, never mind. This next item was the other Factory 52 resolution. We then move on to item number 7, which is the ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a First Amendment to grant agreement with Hamilton County for a grant to complete the Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project and declaring an emergency. Ms. Royce.
I move we suspend the rules and have all 3 readings.
Motion by Ms. Royce to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings of the ordinance.
An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a First Amendment to grant agreement with Hamilton County for a grant to complete the Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a First Amendment to grant an agreement with Hamilton County for a grant to complete the Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a First Amendment to grant agreement with Hamilton County for a grant to complete the Elm Avenue Flood Elimination Project and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling, sorry.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Abstain.
6 voting for and 1 abstention, the motion carries. Moving on to administration reports. Mayor Snyder did notify me that he would not be in attendance this evening. And, well, Mr. Moore?
The law department's been really busy creating ordinances and resolutions, and now we're working on easement agreements. That's all I got.
Any questions for Mr. Moore? All right. Look, I don't have my monitors.
No, it's okay. I'm going to be so fast.
All right, moving on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business? Mrs. Hoover.
So fast. Upcoming blood drive, we're doing, City of Norwood celebrates MLK, Saturday, January the 11th, 10 to 12. There's going to be flyers that'll be starting to spread all over, so please look out for that. The gift for donating is black joggers, so make your full blood donation outfit complete. And then my only other thing is leaf collection officially ends this Friday, December the 13th. I was informed by Mr. Powers that there was an issue with one of our leaf collectors and it was down and the maintenance gentleman was on vacation, so that delayed things. So a few spots will be going on past that December 13th date, but for most folks, this Friday is your last day, the day after garbage day. And that's all I got. Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Bowling.
I was also planning to touch on leaf removal. Just as a follow-up, I know some folks have had concerns about leaf trucks coming by and not stopping for their leaves. They do at some point get full and they have to go to be emptied. And some folks were worried about leaf trucks not coming down their streets at all. We all know we have very narrow roads. My road is not really passable by the leaf truck, unfortunately. If that is a case where your leaves have been sitting for a while and you're concerned about them not being picked up in time, there are free leaf bags at the health department, or the Board of Health, rather. Go grab some leaf bags, bag your leaves up, put them at the curb. They'll be taken away.
Thank you. Any further unfinished business? Moving on to new business. Mrs. Franzen.
I just want to commend both Christmas Town. I heard it was a wonderful event. I'm really sad I could not go. I had a friend in town that I never see. But from all accounts, it was a great event, well-attended, and the Santa was okay. No, it was Mr. Gurton, and I heard he did a great job. So I also want to thank the Norwood Recreation Department for having the giving tree, all of the ornaments that the individual children have been taken. I turned in my gifts just yesterday, so I'm glad that some kids will be having a nicer Christmas than they might have otherwise had.
Thank you. Any other new business? I do have 2 items, actually one to place in the Finance Committee, and that is to look at supplemental funding for Norwood Community Television. I did attend a meeting with school board representatives earlier, prior to coming to this meeting. It would be a shared cost because we both utilize the services. It looks like it would be around a $30,000 amount, 30 from the city as well as the schools. But this would be, again, further discussion for the Finance Committee, and I have some supplemental stuff for that as well. And I did receive an email from a resident expressing some concerns about a potential homeless situation on Allison Street that I would like to place into the Housing Committee. And I can forward, Mrs. Hoover, I can forward you that email.
Thank you.
As well. Any other new business items? All right. We have one communication, and that is from Mayor Schneider with a letter of support regarding the new Community Authority trustee appointment. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we receive and file this if read.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to receive and file as if read. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Royce?
I move we adjourn.
Do we have a second? Mrs. Bowling?
I second.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.